Good evening and welcome back to the Sleepy History channel. Tonight, we're not just reading history, we're peering through the veils of time into a realm where the sacred rhythm of the Nile and the hidden struggles that sustained life and hunger, devotion and survival quietly shaped the world. We'll be exploring the fascinating world of food and daily sustenance in ancient Egypt, uncovering stories that time almost forgot. Before we begin, may I take a quiet moment to reach out to you? Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Whether it's late in the evening or the start of a new day, I'm truly grateful to share a few calm minutes of your time. I always look forward to reading your comments. Hearing where you are and how these stories reach you truly inspires me. Your words often become the spark that shapes the next episode. If you're enjoying these gentle journeys through history, feel free to subscribe or share your ideas for future topics. Your voice helps keep this little corner of history alive and this community growing. So now, get comfortable, settle in, and let the quiet echoes of ancient Egypt carry you away. Our journey begins where a humble farmer rises with the first light of dawn to tend his fields along the Nile's edge. Now, let's begin. Imagine yourself as a humble farmer, rising with the first light of dawn to survey your fields along the Nile's edge. The river is your lifeblood, the source of all that sustains you and your family. Its annual flooding cycle brings rich silt to your soil, transforming the barren desert into a lush oasis of green. But as you walk among the swaying stalks of wheat and barley, you know that your labors are never done. Farming in ancient Egypt was a relentless task, one that required backbreaking work from sunup to sundown. With simple tools like wooden plows and bronze sickles, you and your fellow farmers coaxed life from the stubborn earth. The rhythms of the seasons governed your days, planting in the autumn when the floodwaters receded, tending your crops through the mild winter, and harvesting in the spring before the scorching summer set in. But even with the Nile's bounty, life was far from easy. A poor flood meant meager crops and empty bellies. Too much water could drown your fields and rot your grain. And always, there were the pests, the locusts, the mice, the birds that could strip a field bare in a matter of hours. One year, as the harvest approached, a swarm of locusts descended on your village, like a plague from the gods. You watched in horror as the ravenous insects blanketed your fields, devouring every green leaf and tender stalk. The air hummed with the deafening beat of a million wings as your neighbors frantically tried to drive the locusts away with shouts and smoke. But it was too late. In a single day, months of hard work were reduced to stubble and dust. As you surveyed the ruined fields, your heart sank at the thought of the hard times ahead. With your meager stores, you knew you would be lucky to survive until the next planting season. But such was the way of life for an Egyptian farmer, ever at the mercy of the elements, toiling under the unforgiving sun for the chance to coax another harvest from the unyielding earth. With that vivid image in mind, dear listener, we'll pause for a moment to let the weight of that hardship sink in. Farming was the backbone of Egyptian society, but it was a precarious existence, one that required constant vigilance and unceasing labor. As we continue our journey through the culinary landscape of this ancient civilization, keep that humble farmer in your thoughts. Their struggles and triumphs are woven into every morsel of bread and every drop of beer we'll soon explore. But for now, let your mind drift like a felucca sailing gently down the Nile. As the soft lapping of the water lulls you into a peaceful rest, we'll soon embark on a flavorful adventure through the fields, granaries and kitchens of ancient Egypt. There, We'll uncover the surprising staples that nourished a civilization, the unsung heroes who toiled to feed a nation, and the strange and sometimes unsavory delicacies that graced the tables of the elite. So rest well, dear traveler, and join us next time as we sink our teeth into the bread and beer that built the pyramids, the perils of an ancient Egyptian kitchen, and the curious case of the mummified watermelon seeds. Until then, may your dreams be filled with the gentle sway of papyrus reeds and the soft glow of the eternal Egyptian sun. As we prepare to journey further into the tantalizing world of ancient Egyptian cuisine, it's important to understand the foundation upon which their entire food culture was built, the humble duo of bread and beer. These two staples were so integral to everyday life that they were often used as a form of currency, with workers receiving rations of bread and beer as payment for their labor. But before we explore the intricacies of these ancient culinary pillars, let's set the scene once more. Picture yourself wandering through the bustling streets of Memphis, the capital city of the Old Kingdom. The air is thick with the aroma of baking bread, wafting from the numerous bakeries and stalls that line the dusty avenues. As you weave your way through the crowds, you catch glimpses of bakers hard at work, their faces glistening with sweat as they knead massive mounds of dough and tend to the fires of their clay ovens. One baker in particular catches your eye, a weathered, wiry man with a determined set to his jaw. His name is Amun, and he's been toiling at this trade since he was a boy, learning the secrets of bread making from his father and grandfather before him. As you watch, Amun shapes a lump of dough into a round loaf, his nimble fingers leaving small indentations on the surface to allow for even baking. With a deft motion, he slides the loaf into the oven, the heat from the flames causing his skin to glisten anew. Bread was a sacred art in ancient Egypt, and bakers like Amun were highly respected members of society. They were responsible for producing the food that sustained the entire population, from the lowliest peasant to the mighty pharaoh himself. And with good reason, bread was the cornerstone of the Egyptian diet, consumed at every meal by people of all social classes. But not all bread was created equal. The type of bread you ate depended largely on your status and wealth. The poor subsisted on coarse, dense loaves made from barley, while the middle class enjoyed slightly finer wheat bread. The elite, of course, had access to the most delicate and refined loaves, made from the finest wheat flour and often sweetened with honey, or flavored with spices like cumin and coriander. Despite these variations, all Egyptian bread had one thing in common. It was a far cry from the soft, fluffy loaves we know today. Without leavening agents like yeast, Egyptian bread was flat and dense, more akin to a hearty cracker than a pillowy slice of modern bread. It was also full of impurities, from bits of stone from the grinding process to the occasional insect that found its way into the dough. But to the ancient Egyptians, this humble fare was nothing short of divine. Bread was seen as a gift from the gods, a symbol of life and nourishment. In fact, the hieroglyph for bread was the same as the one for life, underscoring its profound significance in their culture. As the sun begins to set over the bustling streets of Memphis, casting a golden glow over the clay ovens and the bakers who tend them, we'll leave Amun to his labors and turn our attention to the other half of this iconic duo, beer. Like bread, beer was a staple of the Egyptian diet, consumed by everyone from the pharaoh to the lowliest laborer. But this ancient brew was a far cry from the crisp, clear lagers and ales we know today. Egyptian beer was thick and cloudy, full of sediment and debris from the brewing process. It was made from partially baked barley bread, crumbled and mixed with water, and then left to ferment in the hot Egyptian sun. The result was a nutritious, but rather unappetizing beverage, more akin to thin gruel than the refreshing pint we might imagine. It was low in alcohol content, but high in calories and nutrients, making it a valuable source of sustenance for the hard-working people of Egypt. But beer was more than just a foodstuff. It was a social lubricant, a way to bring people together and celebrate life's joys and sorrows. From grand feasts in the pharaoh's palace to humble gatherings in the mud-brick homes of the common folk, beer flowed freely, lubricating tongues and lifting spirits. In fact, the Egyptians loved their beer so much that they even had a god dedicated to it, Tenanit, the goddess of beer and childbirth. Her name meant she of the beer, and she was often depicted holding a loaf of bread and a jug of beer, symbolizing the nourishment and life-giving properties of these staples. As the night deepens and the sound of clinking clay cups echoes through the starlit streets, we can almost imagine the laughter and chatter of the ancient Egyptians as they gather to share a meal and a draught of beer. It's a timeless scene, one that reminds us of the enduring power of food and drink to bring people together, even across the vast expanse of time and culture. But as we drift off to sleep, lulled by the gentle murmur of those ancient voices, we must remember that this simple fare was not always a source of joy and comfort. In a world where hunger and scarcity were constant threats, bread and beer were precious commodities, hard won by the sweat and toil of countless laborers. In our next journey through the culinary landscape of ancient Egypt, we'll explore the harsh realities of food production and distribution in this complex society. From the backbreaking labor of the farmers who coaxed life from the stubborn soil to the artisans who transformed humble grains into divine sustenance, we'll uncover the hidden stories behind the food on the Egyptian table. But for now, dear listener, let yourself be lulled by the gentle bubbling of fermenting beer and the soft crackle of baking bread. As you slip into dreams, imagine yourself as a guest at an Egyptian feast, reclining on soft cushions as servants bring platter after platter of exotic delicacies. The air is thick with the scent of roasting meat, the chatter of happy voices, and the soft strains of harp music. It's a moment of abundance and joy, a fleeting glimpse of the good life in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. So rest well, dear traveller, and join us again as we continue our journey through the fascinating and often surprising world of ancient Egyptian food. Until then, may your dreams be sweet and your heart be light, buoyed by the enduring spirit of a people who found nourishment and joy in the simplest of things. As we delve deeper into the complex and often precarious world of food in ancient Egypt, it's important to remember that not everyone had access to the same bounty. While the tables of the elite may have groaned under the weight of lavish feasts, the average Egyptian had a much more humble fare, one that was often lacking in variety and nutrition. One of the most striking examples of this disparity can be seen in the consumption of meat. For the vast majority of Egyptians, meat was a rare luxury, reserved for special occasions or religious festivals. Cattle, in particular, were highly valued for their role in agriculture. They were used for ploughing, threshing, and hauling heavy loads, making them far too precious to be slaughtered for food. Instead, the main sources of meat for the common folk were goats, sheep, and pigs, which were easier to raise and required less valuable grazing land. Even then, meat was often stretched thin, used more as a flavouring agent than a main course. A typical meal might consist of a small piece of goat or sheep, stewed with vegetables and served over a hearty portion of bread or barley. But while the poor made do with these meagre portions, the wealthy enjoyed a much more varied and indulgent diet. At the grand feasts of the pharaohs and nobles, guests would dine on an array of exotic meats, from succulent cuts of beef and veal to more unusual fare like gazelle, antelope, and even hippopotamus. One such feast is recorded in the tomb of Pepiank the Middle, a high-ranking official from the 6th dynasty. The walls of his tomb are adorned with scenes of a lavish banquet, complete with tables piled high with roasted fowl, haunches of beef, and baskets overflowing with fruit and bread. In one particularly striking image, servants carry a massive platter bearing the hindquarters of a full-grown cow, a testament to the wealth and status of the host. But even for the elite, such extravagance was the exception rather than the rule. For most meals, even the wealthy relied on a more modest spread of poultry, fish, and game. Ducks, geese, and pigeons were popular choices, as were Nile perch, catfish, and mullet. These were often roasted or boiled and served with a variety of fresh and dried fruits, as well as the ubiquitous bread and beer. But while the specifics of the menu might vary, one thing remained constant across all strata of Egyptian society: the importance of ritual and symbolism in dining. Every meal was an opportunity to honor the gods and ancestors, to reaffirm social bonds and hierarchies, and to partake in the eternal cycle of life and death. This is nowhere more evident than in the elaborate funerary feasts that were held in honor of the deceased. These meals were not just a way to celebrate the life of the departed. They were a vital link between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, a way to ensure that the deceased would have all the sustenance they needed for their journey through the afterlife. In the tomb of King Tutankhamun, for example, archaeologists found a veritable treasure trove of food offerings, from loaves of bread and cakes to joints of meat and jars of wine and beer. These offerings were not just symbols. They were believed to magically transform into real food for the king to enjoy in the hereafter, a perpetual feast that would sustain him for all eternity. As we ponder these ancient beliefs and customs, it's easy to feel a sense of awe at the deep significance that food held for the ancient Egyptians. Every meal was a sacred act, a way to commune with the divine and to affirm one's place in the cosmic order. And while the specifics of the menu might have varied by class and occasion, the underlying importance of food as a source of both physical and spiritual nourishment remained constant. So as we drift off to sleep, let us hold this thought in our hearts, that even in a world of scarcity and hardship, the Egyptians found ways to infuse their meals with meaning and purpose. Whether it was a humble bowl of lentil stew or a lavish spread of roasted meats, every bite was a reminder of the preciousness of life, the bounty of the earth, and the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. And as we dream, perhaps we can imagine ourselves as guests at one of these ancient feasts, reclining on soft cushions as the sounds of music and laughter fill the air. The table before us is laden with exotic delicacies: sizzling skewers of gazelle meat, golden loaves of honey-sweetened bread, jugs of cool, dark beer. We reach out to sample a morsel, and as the flavors dance on our tongue, we feel a sense of connection to those long-ago revelers, a bond that transcends time and space. So rest well, dear listener, and savor these fleeting visions of abundance and joy. For in the morning, we will delve once again into the harsh realities of life in ancient Egypt, the back-breaking labor of the fields, the constant specter of hunger and want. But for now, let us bask in the warmth of human connection and the eternal magic of a shared meal. As we continue our journey through the culinary landscape of ancient Egypt, it's important to acknowledge the darker side of this fascinating culture, the prevalence of foodborne illness and contamination. While the Egyptians were undoubtedly advanced in many aspects of agriculture and food production, they lacked the basic knowledge of sanitation and hygiene that we take for granted today. One of the biggest challenges was the lack of refrigeration. In the scorching heat of the Egyptian sun, food spoiled quickly, particularly meat and dairy products. To combat this, the Egyptians developed a range of preservation techniques, from drying and salting to fermenting and pickling. But these methods were far from foolproof, and food poisoning was a constant threat. This was particularly true for the wealthy, who had access to a wider range of foods, including raw or undercooked meats. In fact, some scholars believe that the famous mummy of Ramses V shows signs of smallpox, which he may have contracted from contaminated food or water. But it wasn't just the elite who suffered from these culinary perils. Even the humble bread that formed the backbone of the Egyptian diet could be a source of illness: the raw grams. In the grand tombs of the pharaohs, adorned with vibrant hieroglyphics and priceless treasures, you might be surprised to find an unusual burial item: watermelon seeds. Yes, scattered amongst the gilded masks and jeweled amulets, archaeologists have discovered the telltale black teardrop shapes of watermelon seeds in many ancient Egyptian tombs. But why would this humble fruit find its way into the sacred resting places of kings? Did the Egyptians really believe their beloved rulers would sprout a watermelon patch in the afterlife? The answer is lost to the sands of time, but it's a quirky mystery that hints at the complex relationship between food, death, and eternity in the ancient Egyptian worldview. You see, the Egyptians were positively obsessed with sustenance in the afterlife. They believed that to enjoy eternal life, the dead would need to eat and drink just like the living. This concept shaped the very core of Egyptian funerary practices. The painstaking process of mummification was all about preserving the body so it could continue to house the soul and partake in the pleasures of the everlasting. And those posthumous pleasures were no ascetic affair. Oh no, the Egyptian afterlife was imagined as a lush, bountiful paradise where the deceased could feast on the finest delicacies for all eternity. To ensure their kings and queens would never go hungry in the hereafter, the Egyptians packed their tombs with a mind-boggling array of foodstuffs. Imagine being a royal embalmer, carefully placing plump dates, fresh figs and pomegranates into the burial chamber, nestling baskets of purple grapes and ripe melons alongside jars of wine and honey. Slabs of cured meat, loaves of bread shaped like animals, even entire roast geese and oxen were all tucked away to feed the pharaoh's car for eternity. The tomb was transformed into an overflowing celestial pantry. But the Egyptians didn't stop at real food. They hedged their bets with symbolic offerings too. Little wooden models of granaries, butcher shops and bakeries were popular tomb goods, meant to magically spring to life and provide a limitless supply of sustenance in the afterlife. Adorably tiny clay ox figures were buried to till the fields, and wooden dolls of servants placed to wait on the deceased hand and foot and cater to their every culinary whim. Perhaps most charmingly, the Egyptians crafted exquisite little food sculptures out of painted ceramics. Glossy bunches of green onions, plump loaves of bread, cuts of meat complete with gelatin wobble. These artistic morsels were both gorgeous and practical, a sort of permanent food supply that couldn't spoil or get gobbled up by hungry tomb robbers. So the ancient Egyptians were clearly very concerned about their elites staying well fed in the afterlife. But what about the common folk? Did the average Egyptian get to enjoy these eternal picnic baskets too? Sadly, this sumptuous vision of the afterlife was a luxury like any other, and the divide between rich and poor extended into the realm of the dead. While the pharaohs and nobles feasted on fancy fare for forever, most Egyptians had to make do with much humbler burials. The vast majority couldn't afford lavish tombs stuffed with real and symbolic foods. At most, a few loaves, some fruit and vegetables, and if they were lucky, a bit of meat or poultry might be left as offerings. Instead of golden granary models, the poor often made do with humbler clay pots or even just palm fronds laid over the grave as a makeshift meal. Some could only dream of having even these meagre morsels to carry into the afterlife. It was a stark reminder that even in death, access to a varied and plentiful diet was determined by wealth and status. Still, the idea that one would need food and drink for all eternity was so fundamental that even the lowliest burials tried to provide some form of sustenance for the dearly departed. Archaeologists have found graves of the common people with just a shard of a pottery bowl and a few kernels of wheat to symbolize an eternal meal. So, from the glittering tombs of the pharaohs to the simple graves of the peasants, the ancient Egyptians were united in their unshakable belief in the importance of food in the afterlife. And while the gulf between the lavish royal buffets and the pittance of the poor was vast, the impulse to nourish the dead was universal. This deep-seated desire to ensure eternal eating may seem quite foreign to us today, but in a way, it's not so different from the customs we still practice when a loved one passes, leaving a favorite candy bar or pack of cigarettes in the casket, raising a toast at the wake, preparing the dishes they loved for a memorial meal. Food is so fundamental to the human experience that it remains inextricably linked with how we grapple with death. The ancient Egyptians took this concept to an extreme, but they were grappling with the same existential questions we still face today. How do we make sense of the great unknowable? How do we maintain our connection to those we've lost? And in their own elaborate way, they found some comforting answers in the simple, powerful act of feeding the dead. By filling their tombs with both real and symbolic foods, the Egyptians assured themselves that their pharaohs, their loved ones, and maybe even themselves would never go hungry in the hereafter. They could face eternity secure in the knowledge that the things that sustained them in life would always be waiting for them in death. And who knows, maybe those oddball offerings like watermelon seeds envisioned a different kind of afterlife, one where the dead could actually grow and harvest their own food in an eternal garden paradise. Or maybe, like so many funerary goods, they served as a sort of idealized representation of the abundance the deceased enjoyed in life and hoped to carry into the beyond. We'll likely never know for sure, but that's part of the enduring fascination of ancient Egyptian funerary cuisine. Those lovingly prepared meals and sculptural morsels, those granary models and baskets of fruit, they offer a tantalizing glimpse into an ancient worldview, both strange and strangely familiar. They remind us of the timeless universal human hunger to understand and embrace the great mystery of what lies beyond. So the next time you're enjoying a slice of juicy watermelon, take a moment to appreciate those little black seeds. Who knows, you might just be savoring the same taste of eternity that the ancient Egyptians once imagined in the grand tombs of the pharaohs. And in that sweet, fleeting moment of communion with the past, the distance between their world and ours may not feel quite so vast after all. Of course, the ancient Egyptians couldn't predict the preservative power of their arid desert tombs. In a way, their obsession with ensuring a steady supply of food for the dead was all too successful. Many of the food offerings they so carefully placed have survived in remarkable condition for thousands of years. When archaeologists first started exploring the tombs in the early 20th century, they were astonished to find 3,000-year-old loaves that were still soft and moist to the touch. Bunches of grapes and figs had shriveled into raisins but retained their original shapes. Cuts of meat had desiccated into tough jerky but were instantly recognizable as beef, goat, or gazelle. Even more perishable offerings like lotus flowers, honey cakes, and blocks of cheese had transformed into blackened rock-like lumps, but still held their shape. And yes, countless desiccated watermelon seeds were scattered throughout, as perfectly preserved as the day they were buried. For the early Egyptologists, unearthing these ancient food offerings must have felt like stumbling onto a fairy tale feast, laid out and waiting for a guest who never arrived. They marveled at the eerie freshness of the fare, so carefully prepared and beautifully presented, you could almost imagine the scent of baking bread still hanging in the air. But for all the Egyptians' painstaking efforts to provide their dead with a permanent food supply, the cruel irony is that these lovingly prepared offerings were never actually consumed. The tombs may have functioned like magical refrigerators, but the deceased were in no position to enjoy their contents. In fact, the very idea of the dead actually eating their afterlife offerings was likely more symbolic than literal. The Egyptians believed that the ka, or life force, of the food could be absorbed and nourish the K of the deceased without physically consuming it. The offerings were more like an eternal buffet for the soul, sustaining the spirit rather than the body. Which is lucky for the pharaohs, since many of their mummified remains show clear signs of dental problems from a lifetime of rich, sugary foods. Imagine the toothache of eating a honey cake that's been sitting around for a few millennia. Even in the afterlife, it seems, the hazards of an elite diet could not be escaped. Still, it's hard not to be moved by the devotion and care that the Egyptians poured into these eternal offerings. In a world where most people scraped by on the bare minimum, the idea of being able to provide your loved ones with an everlasting abundance of food must have been deeply comforting. And for the pharaohs and nobles who enjoyed the cream of the crop in life, the knowledge that their favorite foods would follow them into death must have eased the sting of mortality. They could close their eyes for the last time, secure in the knowledge that the sweetness of a fig, the savor of a roast goose, the comforting chew of a honey cake would always be waiting for them in the world to come. In the end, maybe that was the real power of these eternal offerings, not to provide any practical sustenance, but to offer a kind of spiritual nourishment, a tangible link between this life and the next. A reminder that the simple pleasures that brought joy in this world would not be lost in the great unknown. And who could blame them for hoping that the afterlife would be a place of endless abundance, free from the hunger and scarcity that so often plagued the living? In a world where food was so frequently a source of stress and hardship, the idea of an eternity where every meal was a magnificent feast must have seemed like the ultimate divine reward. So while we may chuckle at the image of a mummified pharaoh rising to snack on a 3,000-year-old watermelon, it's worth remembering the deeply human hopes and fears that those humble seeds represent. The need to nourish not just the body, but the soul, to find some form of permanence in the face of life's fleeting nature. The Egyptians may have gone to extraordinary lengths to secure their eternal picnic baskets, but the desire to carry the sweetness of life into the shadow of death is one that still resonates across the ages. And in the end, is it really so strange to hope that the things that brought us comfort and joy in this world might somehow follow us into the next? After all, if there is an afterlife waiting for us beyond the veil, who wouldn't want it to come with a side of honey cakes and ripe figs? The ancient Egyptians were just doing their best to pack the ultimate celestial lunchbox, to ensure that the simple pleasures of a good meal would never truly be lost. And in their grand tombs and humble graves alike, those lovingly prepared offerings stand as a testament to the enduring power of food to connect us across the ages, to offer a tangible link between this world and whatever lies beyond. They may be silent now, but those mummified morsels still whisper of the hopes and dreams of the people who laid them so carefully to rest. So the next time you're savoring a slice of watermelon, take a moment to appreciate the long and winding history behind those little black seeds. Who knows, you might just be sharing a tiny taste of eternity, a fleeting connection to the ancient Egyptians who once dreamed of an afterlife where the sweetness of life would never fade away. And in that brief moment of communion, across the vast expanse of time and culture that separates us, the distance between their world and ours may not feel quite so great after all. We are all, in the end, just doing our best to find some form of nourishment that will sustain us through this life and whatever lies beyond. The ancient Egyptians may have gone about it in their own unique and elaborate way, but the impulse to feed the ones we love, in this world and the next, is one that still pulses through the human heart. And whether it's a grand tomb feast or a simple graveside offering, that act of eternal nurturing remains a powerful symbol of the unbreakable bonds of love and remembrance. As the old saying goes, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Perhaps the ancient Egyptians understood that the way to the soul's eternal contentment was through the stomach as well. And in their lovingly prepared offerings, they left us a poignant reminder of the comfort and meaning we can find in even the simplest acts of sustenance. So let us raise a metaphorical glass to the ancient Egyptians and their eternal picnic baskets. May we all be so lucky as to have someone who cares enough to pack us a lunch for the great beyond. And may we never forget the power of a shared meal to connect us, to sustain us, and to nourish our souls through all the mysteries of life and death. In the end, perhaps that is the greatest lesson we can learn from the food of the pharaohs, that no matter how much the world may change, no matter how vast the gulf of time and culture that separates us, the basic human need for sustenance, for connection, for comfort in the face of the unknown endures. And whether it's a humble loaf of bread or a sumptuous feast fit for a king, the act of feeding and being fed remains one of the most powerful ways we have to express our love, our care, our hope for eternal togetherness. So the next time you sit down to a meal, take a moment to savor not just the flavors on your tongue, but the deeper meaning behind each bite. The ways in which food connects us to each other, to our pasts, to our hopes for the future. And if you should find a stray watermelon seed, consider setting it aside. Who knows? It may just be your own little piece of eternity, a tiny symbol of the unending abundance we all hunger for in this life and the next. The ancient Egyptians may have been a bit extreme in their picnic planning for the afterlife, but they understood better than most the profound link between food and forever. And in their grand tombs and simple graves alike, they left us a reminder that even the most humble meal can be a sacred thing when it's offered with love. So let us all take a page from their eternal cookbook and remember to nourish not just our bodies, but our souls. To feed each other with compassion, with care, with the hope of a shared eternity where hunger has no place. In the end, that may be the most enduring legacy of the food of the pharaohs. Not the mummified meals or the golden granaries, but the simple, timeless truth that when we break bread together, whether in this world or the next, we are all one family, bound by the unbreakable bonds of love and remembrance. And that is a lesson that will endure long after the last crumb of those ancient loaves has crumbled to dust. A reminder that, no matter how much the world may change, the power of a shared meal to sustain us, to connect us, to lift us up, will never fade away. So let us all raise a glass to the eternal picnickers of ancient Egypt and to the enduring spirit of nourishment that connects us all. May we always find comfort and joy in the simple act of feeding and being fed in this life and whatever lies beyond. And may we never forget that, in the end, the greatest feast of all is the one we share with those we love across the vast expanse of time and space that separates us, but can never truly keep us apart. For in the breaking of bread, we are all one, bound together in an eternal banquet of the soul. And that is a meal that will never lose its savor, no matter how many centuries may pass. So let us all dig in and savor every last crumb of this strange and wonderful thing called life. And let us never forget to pack a little something extra, just in case. After all, you never know when you might need a snack for the road to eternity. So here's to the food of the pharaohs and to the eternal picnic that awaits us all. May we always find nourishment for body and soul in this world and the next. And may we never forget the power of a shared meal to connect us, to sustain us, to remind us of the unending abundance of love and life. For in the end, that is the true legacy of those ancient Egyptian feasts. Not just a glimpse into a long vanished world, but a reminder of the timeless truths that bind us all together, no matter how much the world may change. So let us all raise a forkful of eternity and dig into the great banquet of life. And let us never forget to save room for dessert. After all, you never know what sweet surprises the afterlife may have in store. Bon appétit, my friends. And may your eternal picnic basket always be full to bursting. And so, when we look back at the lives of the average ancient Egyptian, toiling in the fields, and grinding grain to eke out a meager living. It's a far cry from the opulent feasts and golden splendor we usually picture. The ancient Egyptian diet was, in many ways, a story of scarcity, inequality, and constant threat of famine. While the elites dined on roast fowl, cakes sweetened with honey, and jars of wine, the common people subsisted mainly on bread, vegetables, and beer. Meat was a rare luxury, usually only eaten on special occasions or as part of religious ceremonies. Beef was especially prized and expensive, as cattle were so vital for agriculture that slaughtering them for food was seen as wasteful. Goat, sheep, and pig were somewhat more common on the tables of the well-to-do, but still out of reach for most Egyptians. Wild game like gazelle, antelope, and hare were occasionally hunted in the desert fringes, but required significant time and resources to catch. For the poor, fish and poultry were more accessible sources of protein, though still not an everyday indulgence. Imagine the life of a fisherman, casting his nets into the Nile day after day, hoping for a bountiful catch. He might haul in tilapia, catfish, mullet, perch, or eels, which could be eaten fresh or dried and salted to preserve them. Fish was also commonly used as bait to catch waterfowl like ducks and geese. These would be captured in large clap nets, then kept in captivity and fattened up for the table or for tribute to the temples. But even these hard-won delicacies could turn deadly in the blink of an eye. With no refrigeration and poor sanitation, contamination and spoilage were constant threats. Archaeology shows that many Egyptians suffered from intestinal parasites and foodborne illnesses, despite the abundance of the Nile Valley. For the pharaohs and their court, the danger was more insidious, the ever-present risk of poison. Royal food tasters were employed to sample every dish before it reached the king's table, watching vigilantly for any sign of contamination or foul play. It was a high-stakes job, where one mistake could mean the difference between life and death. One has to wonder what might have been going through a food taster's mind as he lifted each morsel to his lips. Was he savoring the rich flavors and exotic spices, or just praying to the gods that this bite wouldn't be his last? Did his palate grow deadened over time, unable to appreciate the subtleties of taste through the fog of fear? Even for a food taster who survived to old age, the cumulative effects of sampling so many dishes over the years must have taken a toll. Imagine the digestive issues, the worn teeth, the sheer exhaustion of constantly being on high alert. It was a stressful and thankless job, yet one that was absolutely essential to protect the ruler and maintain the stability of the kingdom. The pharaohs may have believed themselves to be living gods, but in reality, they were as vulnerable to the whims of fate and the ravages of time as any mortal. And nowhere was this more apparent than in their sacred duty to be mummified and ushered into the afterlife. The mummification process was a closely guarded secret, known only to a select group of priests and embalmers. They used a variety of tools and ingredients to carefully remove the internal organs, desiccate the body, and wrap it in layers of linen. But amidst the natron salt, fragrant resins, and sacred oils, there were also some surprisingly commonplace items, things you might find in any ancient Egyptian kitchen. Honey was one of the most important substances in mummification, prized for its antibacterial properties that helped prevent decay. The Egyptians knew it as the tears of Re, believing it to have come from the eye of the sun, God himself. Jars of honey were poured over the body cavities, or used to fill the emptied eye sockets and plump the sunken cheeks. Other foodstuffs also played a role in the mummification ritual. Onions and garlic were placed in the body cavity or under the wrappings, thought to have protective and regenerative powers. Juniper berries and cinnamon bark aided in preserving the flesh and masking unpleasant odors. And in a strange echo of the Egyptians' love of bread, small cakes and biscuits in the shape of the deceased were often included in the tomb offerings. These so-called corn mummies were formed out of bread dough that was shaped into human figures, then baked or dried. They were buried alongside the mummy as a symbolic double, ensuring that the deceased would have a backup body in case their original one was damaged. Just as bread sustained and strengthened the Egyptians in life, they believed it could do the same in death. But perhaps the most mysterious and intriguing food item found in many Egyptian tombs is one that seems oddly out of place: watermelon seeds. These small black seeds have been discovered scattered in burial chambers and tucked into linen wrappings, leaving Egyptologists puzzled as to their significance. Some speculate that the seeds represented fertility and regeneration, the potential for new life emerging from the dark earth. Others wonder if the Egyptians believed the dead could grow their own melons in the afterlife, a juicy treat to refresh them on their eternal journey. Or maybe the seeds were simply a reminder of the simple pleasures of the earthly realm, a nostalgia for the taste of crisp watermelon on a hot desert day. We may never know for certain the true meaning behind these enigmatic watermelon seeds, but their presence in the tombs speaks to the deep and abiding connection the ancient Egyptians felt between food, death, and the divine. In a world where scarcity and uncertainty were ever present, the promise of nourishment and abundance in the afterlife was a powerful comfort. And so, as we tuck ourselves in for the night, let us dream of golden fields of wheat along the Nile, of the sweet aroma of freshly baked bread, of the cool kiss of beer on a parched throat. Let us remember the resilience and ingenuity of the ancient Egyptians, who coaxed life from the desert sands and built an enduring civilization on the bounty of the river. And if, in our dreams, we find ourselves wandering through the torchlit halls of a pharaoh's tomb, don't be alarmed if you spot a little pile of watermelon seeds nestled amongst the treasures. Just smile knowingly and tip your hat to the mysteries of the ancient world. Then drift off to sleep, lulled by the gentle whispers of history, the eternal ebb and flow of the Nile. You're right, having just caught a glimpse of daily life through the eyes of an ancient Egyptian farmer and baker, we now turn to take a closer look at the staple crops and foods that sustained this great civilization for millennia, as well as some of the challenges and surprises they encountered along the way. As the annual floodwaters of the Nile receded each year, it was time to plant the mainstay of the Egyptian diet: wheat and barley. Imagine vast fields stretching out across the floodplain. Workers bent double to scatter seed by hand under the watchful eye of an overseer. The humble grains they grew would be transformed into the twin pillars of Egyptian cuisine: bread and beer. Bread was the cornerstone, the staff of life, consumed by king and commoner alike. The coarse, flat barley loaves of the poor would have been a far cry from the refined wheat cakes and pastries enjoyed by the elite, but all depended on the skill of Egypt's bakers. Day in, day out, they would knead and shape dough, stoking fires in clay ovens, turning out hundreds of loaves to feed the hungry masses. One can only imagine the heat, the smoke, the constant threat of burns, and the ever-present risk that a stray spark could reduce the whole operation to cinders. And what did they wash that dry bread down with? Why beer, of course. The ancient Egyptians were among the world's earliest brewers, with large-scale production in state-run breweries, as well as a thriving cottage industry of home brewing. But this was a far cry from the crisp, clear lagers and ales we drink today. Egyptian beer was a thick, nutritious sludge, brewed from half-baked barley bread dissolved in water, full of chaff and debris that had to be strained out with a reed before drinking. It may have been safer than the questionable water of the Nile, but it was definitely an acquired taste. To accompany their bread and beer, most Egyptians ate a variety of vegetables. Onions and garlic were popular, along with lentils, peas, leeks, radishes, turnips, and lettuce. The lush gardens on the banks of the Nile must have been a welcome sight, bursting with green among the desert sands. But growing them was an unending battle against pests, drought, and disease. One can imagine the dismay of a farmer surveying his crops after a locust swarm had passed through, leaving devastation in its wake. Even the back-breaking labour of digging irrigation ditches by hand was no guarantee against the ever-present threat of the Nile. One year it might not flood enough, the next it could wash everything away. Fruit was a much rarer treat, enjoyed mainly by the wealthy when it was in season. Dates, figs, pomegranates, melons. Grapes were prized, although more often dried into raisins than made into wine. Perhaps surprisingly, one crop that was not valued for human consumption was the humble chickpea, a staple in Egypt today, but back then it was used mainly for animal fodder. And as anyone who has cooked dried beans knows, storage and spoilage of crops was a perennial headache. Much of the grain harvest was kept in tightly sealed underground silos, but dampness and rot were a constant danger. Imagine the disappointment of opening the granary after months of careful rationing, only to find a rancid, mouldy mess. Not even the all-powerful pharaoh could decree that food stay fresh forever. Compared to the starchy staples, meat and dairy were relative luxuries, with consumption split sharply along class lines. For most common folk, cattle were simply too valuable as beasts of burden to be eaten regularly. Even a relatively prosperous farmer might slaughter one only for a special occasion or religious festival. Oxen were for ploughing, cows for milk, not for frying up on a whim. More affordable sources of protein included goats, sheep, pigs, and wild game like gazelle or ibex. But these too would have been carefully rationed. Fish and poultry were somewhat more accessible, with the Nile teeming with perch, catfish, and tilapia, while ducks, geese, pigeons, and quail could be hunted in the marshes or raised at home. But they were still not an everyday indulgence for most. Imagine the excitement in a poor family's household when the father returned from a fishing trip with a good-sized catch, a welcome break from the daily grind of bread and vegetables. Dairy products like milk, butter, and cheese were also mainly the preserve of the rich, as so few cattle could be spared just for milking. A royal banquet table might groan under the weight of sumptuous goat cheeses and fatty milk puddings, while the average Egyptian looked on in envy, perhaps sipping a bowl of watery milk gruel. Even for the well-off, the lack of refrigeration meant that all but the most exclusive delicacies had to be consumed quickly before they spoiled in the desert heat. One can picture an army of servants scurrying to carry platters from the kitchen fires to the tables of the nobility, desperate to serve everything while still at its freshest. But despite their best efforts, contamination was a fact of life. The unfortunate pharaoh, as much as any commoner, would have been constantly at risk from food poisoning and other ailments from unrefrigerated, unpasteurized ingredients. One can only feel pity for the unenviable job of the royal food taster, a position of great prestige and peril in equal measure. A mouthful of the wrong dish could mean a swift and unpleasant demise, but it was a risk they had to take with every meal to protect their lord from harm. Accidental or intentional, palace intrigue indeed. While the elites dined in grandeur, the majority of ancient Egyptians had to make do with a much more humble and precarious food supply. The bounty of the Nile was plentiful in years when the floods cooperated, the harvests were good, and the food stayed fresh. But those perfect conditions were far from guaranteed. More often, the people faced scarcity, spoilage, backbreaking labor, and the constant spectre of contamination and disease. It's sobering to think that despite the near miraculous agricultural productivity they were able to achieve with the tools they had, malnutrition and parasites were still rampant. The pressures of feeding a burgeoning civilization in an unforgiving environment with no modern technology or food safety oversight. But still, ancient Egyptians found ingenious ways to preserve the flavors of life for as long as possible, Salt, honey, and spices could keep meat from putrefying for a time, allowing the wealthy to savour slivers of cured ox or gazelle, perhaps a treat from a bountiful festival offering or hunting expedition. And of course, there were the culinary magicians whose talents were reserved for the most sacred purpose of all: mummification. The key to preserving human remains for the afterlife was desiccation, removing all moisture to prevent decay. And what better way to dry out a corpse than to pack it in the same savoury salts and resins used to flavour food? Alongside the mysterious embalming potions like myrrh, mummies were stuffed with familiar foodstuffs like onions, cassia, and cinnamon. Imagine the embalmers, carefully measuring out precious spices, normally used sparingly to perk up a rich man's roast antelope, now slathered liberally on the desiccated flesh of the deceased. But stranger delicacies lurked within the pyramids and tombs, waiting to feed the appetites of the dead in perpetuity. Alongside jewels and furniture, the deceased were buried with a smorgasbord of symbolic treats. Hedgehog cakes, shaped like the spiny creatures, were meant to speed the mummy's ascent to the stars. Hegag cakes, in the shape of ears, would magically open the dead to the prayers of the living. And let's not forget the watermelon seeds found scattered in many burial chambers. Did they expect the dead to start an otherworldly melon patch? Though, with how much the Egyptians loved their bread and beer, perhaps they assumed the afterlife had the same tastes. Miniature models of livestock, vegetables, and grain were included as eternal offerings, a kind of undying, all-you-can-eat buffet. But all whimsy aside, the reverence ancient Egyptians had for food, in life and in death, is deeply revealing. With every seed sown and every offering given, they displayed both a clear-eyed understanding of the precariousness of their existence and an inspiring faith in the power of human ingenuity and diligent labour to provide. They knew that their civilization flourished or failed with the food supply, and so, from the mightiest pharaoh to the lowliest labourer, all were intimately aware of where their meals came from and what it took to get them to the table. So while we today might recoil at the thought of gritting our teeth on barley chaff in our beer, or picking weevils out of our flatbread, or being offered a rack of BBQ mummy ribs, we have to admire the resiliency and resourcefulness of the ancient Egyptian people. They took the rich yet fickle gifts the Nile gave them and, through backbreaking work and painstaking care, transformed them into a complex cuisine, an agricultural system that nourished one of the world's greatest and most enduring civilizations. Their diet may have been shaped by scarcity, inequality, and necessity, but the building blocks would still be recognizable today: flatbreads and vegetables, fish and fowl, the occasional red meat, and a jug of beer to wash it down. The details may have differed: coarser textures, gamier flavors, gritty sediment at the bottom of the glass. But the broad strokes of a hard-won, communally shared meal are timeless and universal. And who knows, maybe a modern gourmand whisked back in time would find something to appreciate, once the shock of unfiltered ale and sandy peter wore off. They could swap bread-baking tips with the palace cooks, marvel at the technique of the master brewers, and compliment the pharaoh's table on that daring hint of cinnamon in the ox tartare. Because while the struggle was real and ever-present, so too was the love of good food and the eternal satisfaction of a hard day's work, rewarded by victuals, however humble. There are many aspects of ancient Egypt that still awe us today: the pyramids, the art, the golden treasures, the esoteric prayers. But perhaps most remarkable and relatable of all is the legacy of their food, the tantalizing thought of recipes and techniques passed down and improvised upon for generations, in an unending quest to wring every last drop of pleasure and sustenance out of a beautiful but harsh land. The faces of the farmers and bakers and brewers may be lost to time, but when we sit down to a hearty meal after a long day's efforts, we partake in the same simple yet irreplaceable joy they knew so well. So the next time you slather some hummus on a toasty slice of pita bread, or sip a frothy mug of cold beer. Take a moment between bites and sips to remember and salute the ancient Egyptians who toiled and innovated and scrimped and savoured along the banks of the Nile so many centuries ago. The sweat of their brows and the fruits of their fields laid the foundation for the culinary diversity and security we enjoy today. And that's not just empty calories, that's real food for thought. As we've seen, the foundation of the ancient Egyptian diet was bread and beer, the two staples that sustained the civilization for thousands of years. But while bread and beer were ubiquitous from the grand palace halls to the dusty village streets, the quality and form of these foods varied greatly between the rich and poor. For the noble and priestly classes, bread was not the coarse, gritty loaf of the common labourer, but a refined art form. The bread served in the homes of the elite was made from finely sifted wheat flour, yielding a soft, fluffy texture. These high-status loaves were often enriched with additions like dates, honey, sesame seeds, or lotus flower, creating a range of flavours and nutritional profiles. The shapes, too, were more elaborate. The upper crust dined on delicate palm frond rolls, crisp horseshoe loaves, swirled braids, and even sculpted figures of animals and gods. For special occasions, the kitchens of the wealthy turned out towering creations like the distinctively conical 𝐲𝐻𝐻 loaf, a true centerpiece. But for the vast majority, bread was a much humbler affair. The typical loaf consumed by farmers, builders, and craftsmen was a heavy, dense disc made from roughly milled barley flour. Barley, cheaper and easier to grow than wheat, was the go-to grain for the lower classes. These coarse brown rounds were filling and calorically dense, but also full of grit from the millstones and chaff from the incompletely threshed grain. Biting into a barley loaf, one could expect a good crunch and possibly a sore tooth. Over time, the tough grains would gradually wear down the teeth, a dental record etched in enamel. The disparity between classes was perhaps even starker when it came to beer. Though often idealized in popular culture, the beer drunk by most Egyptians was a far cry from the crisp, clear lagers sipped on sun-drenched terraces today. For most, beer was less a refreshing treat than a necessary source of nutrition and safe hydration. Drunk from clay cups and bowls, Egyptian beer was a thick, cloudy brew with a soupy consistency. Pieces of crumbled barley bread floated in the murky liquid, remnants of the brewing process. A mouthful of this sludgy beer meant chewing as much as sipping, picking floating chaff from between the teeth. But just like bread, beer came in different grades for different social strata. The upper classes enjoyed a more refined brew, strained of debris, and sometimes flavoured with spices like coriander or dates. For festive occasions and religious rites, special varieties were concocted, like the extra-strong 𝐸𝐴𝐻 beer served at the Feast of Hathor. The goddess of love, fertility, and drunkenness, Hathor was honoured with a brew so potent it was served in ceremonial cups with built-in straws to regulate the flow. An ancient Egyptian 𝐶𝐬𝐬, perhaps. Pausing for a sip of water, one can almost taste the gritty, pungent flavours of a commoner's meal. The rough bread, the cloudy beer, grating against the tongue and teeth. It's a stark reminder of the hardships of daily life for most in this fabled golden age. But it also speaks to the incredible resilience and ingenuity of the Egyptian people, who took the simple gifts of grain and yeast and built an empire that endures in the imagination to this day. As the sun beats down on the sandy banks of the Nile, let us turn our gaze now from the dusty fields and smoky hearths to the glittering court of the pharaoh. For if the diet of the common Egyptian was a study in scarcity and subsistence, the royal table was a cornucopia of delicacies, meats, sweets, exotic fruits, and lavish dishes fit for a god on earth. The culinary gulf between ruler and ruled was as vast as the sacred river itself. Continue from here. The pharaoh's palace was a world apart from the simple mud brick abodes of the common folk. Here, food was not just sustenance, but a symbol of power, a display of wealth and status. The kitchens of the royal residence hummed with activity from dawn to dusk, teams of skilled cooks and servers preparing elaborate meals to tantalize the royal taste buds. Roasted meats were a mainstay of the pharaonic diet, a luxury rarely enjoyed by the lower classes. Succulent cuts of beef, tender lamb, roasted fowl, these were the hallmarks of the royal table. Unlike the common people who relied on hardy goats and sheep, the palace had access to prime cattle, fattened on the lush marshes of the Nile Delta. These pampered beasts were slaughtered specifically for the pharaoh's pleasure, their choicest cuts seasoned with precious spices like cumin, coriander, and mustard seed. Wild game, too, found its way onto the royal menu. Kings and courtiers delighted in hunting in the dense reed thickets along the riverbanks, using throwing sticks to bring down fleet-footed gazelles, ibexes, and hares. These prized catches were then turned over to the palace kitchens, where they were slow roasted and served with rich sauces and garnishes. For the most lavish feasts, more exotic meats might be prepared, the flesh of hippos, giraffes, or even crocodiles, beasts that symbolized the pharaoh's dominion over the untamed wild. But amidst this carnivorous cornucopia, one meat was conspicuously absent from the royal platter: pork. While the common people raised pigs as an affordable source of protein, the upper classes viewed pork as an unclean, inferior food. Some temples even forbade pigs entirely from their precincts, considering them embodiments of the loathsome god Seth. In a rare concession to religious scruple, the pork roast had no place at the pharaoh's table. Instead, the royal kitchen prided itself on elevating humble vegetables to new heights of culinary artistry. Common crops like lentils, peas, leeks, and onions were transformed into sumptuous stews, richly spiced and simmered for hours. Green leafy vegetables were lightly sautéed with garlic and cumin, a vibrant counterpoint to the roasted meats. And for a burst of colour and sweetness, jewel-like pomegranate seeds were sprinkled over salads and pilafs, a tartly refreshing garnish. But the true stars of the pharaonic produce aisle were the fruits, those rare and coveted delicacies reserved for the very elite. Dates, figs, grapes, these were the sweets of choice, sun-ripened and bursting with natural sugars. For the most illustrious occasions, the palace orchards yielded an even greater prize: the Egyptian mango. A far cry from the fibrous Indian import of today, this large, luscious fruit was a true royal indulgence, its sunset-hued flesh prized for its ambrosial flavour. As the light fades and the kitchen fires dim, one can almost see the pharaoh reclining on his gilded couch, a platter of choice morsels at his fingertips. Licking the last traces of honey from his lips, he may spare a moment's thought for the many hands that toiled to bring such bounty to his table. The farmers, the hunters, the cooks and servers. But such musings are fleeting, for the business of kingship calls. There are tributes to count, monuments to plan, a realm to rule, all fueled by the divine sustenance of the royal repast. But even the mighty pharaoh was not immune to the spectre that haunted every Egyptian table, high and low alike: the ever-present threat of contamination and foodborne illness. For in a world without refrigeration, where the very Nile that gave life could also harbour death, every meal was a gamble, a roll of the microbial dice. Continue from here. The glimmering waters of the Nile, the lifeblood of Egyptian civilization, harboured a hidden menace. While the river's annual floods brought fertile silt to the fields, they also carried less savoury cargo: bacteria, parasites, and other invisible threats that could turn a simple meal into a game of gastric roulette. Even in the grand halls of the pharaoh's palace, food safety was a constant concern. With no means of refrigeration, perishable foods like meat, dairy, and fish spoiled rapidly in the intense heat of the Egyptian sun. A cut of beef, fresh and juicy in the morning, could turn rancid and rank by noon. Milk, left out in the open air, quickly curdled and soured, breeding harmful bacteria. And fish, the staple protein of the Nile Delta, was notoriously quick to spoil, its delicate flesh breaking down into a slimy, malodorous mess. To combat these ever-present dangers, the pharaonic kitchens employed a range of preservation techniques. Meats were salted, dried or smoked to extend their shelf life, transforming them into jerky-like strips or cured sausages. Fruits were dried in the sun, concentrating their sugars into chewy, candy-like morsels. And while the art of fermentation was still in its infancy, there is evidence that the Egyptians used early forms of pickling and brining to keep vegetables edible for longer periods. But even with these precautions, foodborne illness was a fact of life in ancient Egypt. The archaeological record is rife with evidence of parasitic infections, dysentery, and other gastrointestinal maladies. Even the mummies of the elite, carefully preserved for eternity, often show signs of chronic digestive issues, a final, silent testament to the perils of the Egyptian diet. Perhaps no one was more acutely aware of these dangers than the pharaoh's food taster. This unsung hero of the royal court held a position of great responsibility and even greater risk. Before every meal, the taster would sample each dish intended for the pharaoh, checking for any signs of spoilage, contamination, or most feared of all, deliberate poisoning. It was a tense and thankless task. With each bite, the taster put their own life on the line, never knowing if the next morsel might be their last. They had to be constantly on guard, attuned to the subtlest changes in taste, texture, and aroma that might signal danger. A slightly sour note in the milk, a whiff of fermentation in the wine, a bitter aftertaste in the bread. Any of these could be the harbinger of a deadly dose. And the stakes could not be higher. The pharaoh, after all, was not just a king, but a living god, the earthly embodiment of the great deity Horus. To allow harm to come to him was not just a failure of duty, but a cosmic catastrophe, a tear in the very fabric of Ma'at, the sacred order that held the universe together. So the taster tasted, day after day, meal after meal, putting their faith in their own senses and in the benevolence of the gods. It was a life of constant vigilance and unrelenting pressure, a daily dance with death in service to the divine. As the taster takes a final, tentative bite and nods to the pharaoh that the meal is safe, one can only imagine the mix of relief and dread that must have coursed through their veins. For in a world where even the food of the gods could turn deadly in an instant, no morsel was too small to be fraught with danger and import. But amidst all the perils and precautions of the Egyptian table, there was one food that stood apart. A substance so precious, so imbued with sacred significance, that it transcended the bounds of mere sustenance. For in honey, the Egyptians found not just sweetness, but a taste of immortality itself. Continue from here. In the ancient Egyptian worldview, the line between food and medicine, nourishment and magic was blurred, and no substance blurred that line more tantalizingly than honey. This golden nectar, harvested from the humming hives that dotted the Nile Valley, was prized not just for its sweetness, but for its myriad mystical and medicinal properties. In the Egyptian pantheon, honey was the tears of the sun, god Ra, fallen to earth to bless and sustain his mortal children. It was a divine elixir, a distillation of pure, celestial essence in sticky, shimmering form. To consume honey was to imbibe the very life force of the gods, to partake in a sacrament older than the pyramids themselves. But honey was more than just a holy emblem. It was a practical panacea, a one-stop shop for all manner of physical and spiritual ills. Egyptian medical texts are replete with references to honey as a healing salve, used to treat everything from burns and cuts to stomach aches and sore throats. Mixed with milk and herbs, it formed soothing cough syrups and digestive tonics. Slathered on the skin, it was thought to promote beauty and youth, a natural cosmetic fit for a queen. But perhaps honey's most hallowed use was in the sacred art of mummification. In preparing a body for its eternal journey through the afterlife, the embalmers turned to honey as a key ingredient in their arcane preservative recipes. Poured over the carefully wrapped corpse, honey formed a sweet, sticky seal, protecting the flesh from decay and locking in the ka, the vital essence, for its passage to the underworld. For the pharaohs and the high priests, the nobles and the scribes, to be preserved in honey was the ultimate posthumous luxury, a guarantee of safe conduct in the great beyond. To be honey-dipped was to be not just mummified, but deified, elevated to a state of immortal sweetness. But even for the common folk, honey held a special place in the Egyptian heart. In a world of scarcity and subsistence, where sweetness was a rare and fleeting pleasure, a finger lick of honey was a taste of pure joy, a momentary reprieve from the harsh realities of life on the Nile. Drizzled over bread, stirred into beer, or savoured straight from the comb, honey was a reminder that even in the bleakest of times, there was still beauty and bounty to be found. As the last rays of the setting sun glint off the honey pots in the palace larder, one can almost hear the whispered prayers of gratitude, the murmured blessings for the golden gift of the bee. For in this land of sand and sun, where life itself hung in a delicate balance, honey was more than just a food. It was a talisman, a promise, a sweet foretaste of eternity. And so, we come to the end of our journey through the cuisine of ancient Egypt. A journey that has taken us from the humble hearths of the farmer to the lavish tables of the pharaoh, from the gritty gruel of the laborer to the honeyed heights of the hereafter. It is a cuisine shaped by scarcity and abundance, by necessity and luxury, by the eternal dance of life and death along the banks of the Nile. But though the specifics may have changed with the passing millennia, the grains more refined, the meats more varied, the preparation more sophisticated, the fundamental essence of Egyptian food remains a constant. For at its heart, this is a cuisine of resilience and ingenuity, of making the most of what the earth and the river provide. It is a testament to the enduring spirit of a people who, in the face of flood and famine, epidemic and invasion, never lost their appetite for life in all its flavors. So the next time you bite into a pita bread or savor a drizzle of honey, pause for a moment and remember the hands that first kneaded that dough, the hives that first yielded that golden nectar. In that moment of mindful eating, you are not just nourishing your body, but communing with the ancients, sharing in a timeless tradition that stretches back to the very dawn of civilization. And who knows, perhaps someday, thousands of years hence, some future gourmand will pause over their plate and wonder at the strange and curious foods of our own time. And in that wondering, that shared sense of culinary curiosity across the ages, we may find a fleeting taste of our own immortality, our own small place in the great, unending banquet of human history. But for now, the hour grows late, the embers fade, and the Sandman's spell grows heavy on the eyelids. So let us bid good night to the ghosts of the pharaohs and the gods, to the farmers and the bakers and the tasters of old. Let their stories be the sweet honey that lulls us into slumber, and their resilience the hidden nutrient that fortifies us for the new day to come. For in the end, is that not the true magic of food? To bring us together, to sustain us, to remind us of our shared humanity across the vast expanse of time. In the flickering light of the cooking fire, in the steam rising from the bread oven, in the laughter and tears and prayers offered over a shared meal, we are all ancient Egyptians, all children of the Nile, all partakers in the great eternal feast of life. So let us savor it while we can, this strange and beautiful banquet. For who knows what wonders and horrors, what delights and deprivations the next course may bring. Let us eat and drink and be merry, for tomorrow we may die. But tonight we dine with the pharaohs, and the honey of eternity is sweet upon our tongue. As we ponder the legacy and lessons of ancient Egyptian cuisine, it's worth reflecting on a few key figures who shaped this civilization's complex relationship with food and agriculture. One such luminary was Imhotep, a renowned polymath who served as chancellor to the pharaoh Djoser in the 27th century BC. Though best remembered today as the architect behind the iconic step pyramid at Saqqara, Imhotep was also revered in his time as a priest, healer, sage, and astronomer. Among his many contributions to Egyptian society were advancements in agriculture and irrigation. Imhotep is credited with designing innovative water management systems that harness the power of the Nile's annual floods. By developing a network of canals, dikes, and basins, he enabled farmers to better control the flow of water to their fields, boosting crop yields and reducing the risk of famine. Imhotep also promoted the use of more advanced farming tools like the ox-drawn plough, which allowed Egyptians to cultivate larger tracts of land with less backbreaking labour. He even invented an early form of the shadoof, a long pole with a bucket on one end and a counterweight on the other, used to manually lift water from the Nile for irrigation. These technologies would remain a cornerstone of Egyptian agriculture for thousands of years to come. Beyond his engineering feats, Imhotep was also a medical pioneer who wrote some of the earliest surviving treatises on healing and hygiene. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating back to 1600 BC, but thought to be based on Imhotep's earlier writings, contains detailed anatomical descriptions, diagnostic instructions, and treatment recommendations for various injuries and ailments. Notably, it includes advice on setting broken bones, stitching wounds, and even performing rudimentary brain surgery. While the papyrus doesn't delve too deeply into matters of diet, it does recognize the importance of nutrition in maintaining health and warding off disease. Imhotep and other ancient Egyptian physicians believed that foods had specific healing properties and could be prescribed to treat certain conditions. For example, honey was used as an antibacterial salve for cuts and burns, while garlic was thought to boost vitality and ward off infections. In fact, medical papyri from the time of Imhotep are some of our best sources of information about ancient Egyptian cuisine. They describe a wide array of foods and drinks, from staples like bread and beer to more exotic fare like wild game, spices, and imported delicacies. The 𝐬𝐵𝐴's Papyrus, another comprehensive medical text, even includes what might be the world's oldest recipe collection, with instructions for preparing dishes like roast quail, honeyed cakes, and a type of fermented fish paste called 𝐹𝐴sik, which, believe it or not, is still eaten in Egypt today as a traditional Sham el-Nessim holiday meal. Of course, for all his wisdom and accomplishments, Imhotep was still a product of his time, an era when food was deeply intertwined with religion, superstition, and social hierarchy. As a high priest and confidant to the pharaohs, he would have enjoyed a far more varied and sumptuous diet than the average Egyptian peasant. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Imhotep likely believed in the magical properties of certain foods and their ability to sustain the dead in the afterlife. Nevertheless, Imhotep's legacy endures as a shining example of ancient Egyptian ingenuity and resilience in the face of adversity. His innovations in agriculture, medicine, and architecture laid the foundation for one of the world's greatest civilizations to flourish along the banks of the Nile. And while the average Egyptian's diet may have been far from glamorous, it was thanks in part to visionaries like Imhotep that they were able to eke out an existence in such an unforgiving environment. So the next time you find yourself savoring a warm slice of bread or sipping a cold glass of beer, take a moment to remember the ancient Egyptians who toiled under the scorching sun to make it all possible. Their story may be a reminder that progress is hard-won, and that even the most basic necessities we take for granted today were once the fruits of great struggle and sacrifice. But it's also a testament to the enduring power of human creativity and adaptability in the face of even the harshest circumstances. As we bid farewell to the dusty fields and bustling marketplaces of ancient Egypt, we can take comfort in the fact that their legacy lives on in the foods we eat and the societies we've built. And perhaps, in some small way, the spirit of innovators like Imhotep lives on too, inspiring us to keep pushing forward, no matter the obstacles in our path. So here's to the unsung heroes of history, the farmers and the bakers and the brewers, without whom none of us would be here today. May their stories nourish our dreams as surely as their labors once nourished their bodies. And with that, our journey through the fascinating and often surprising world of ancient Egyptian cuisine comes to a close. As the last embers of the day fade into the cool embrace of night, we can drift off to sleep with visions of golden wheat fields and fragrant bread ovens dancing in our heads. So let us raise a frothy mug of beer to the hard-working folks who came before us and made it all possible. And let us dream of a future where all can share in the bounty of the earth, free from the scourges of scarcity and hunger that plagued our ancestors for so long. Until next time, this is your faithful historian, signing off with a full belly and a grateful heart. Good night, and sweet dreams of plenty. Let's continue our journey through the culinary landscape of ancient Egypt, where the quest for a good meal was a daily struggle. Despite the odds stacked against them, the Egyptians managed to create a cuisine that sustained them for thousands of years. One of the most intriguing aspects of Egyptian food culture was the role it played in their elaborate funerary practices. The ancient Egyptians believed that the dead would need sustenance in the afterlife, just as they did in this world. As a result, food played a central role in the mummification process and burial rituals. Imagine, if you will, the workshop of a master embalmer deep in the heart of the city of Memphis. The air is thick with the pungent aroma of spices, resins, and oils. An elderly priest, his face lined with wisdom, carefully selects the finest ingredients for the mummification process. He reaches for a jar of honey, prized for its antibacterial properties and its ability to preserve the body. Next, he chooses a sack of natron, a naturally occurring salt that will be used to dry out the corpse and prevent decay. As the priest works, he recites prayers and incantations, invoking the protection of the gods for the journey ahead. He carefully packs the body cavity with linen bags filled with sawdust, spices, and other aromatic substances. These will not only help to preserve the body, but also to mask the odors of decomposition. But the use of food in funerary rites didn't stop at mummification. The tombs of the wealthy and powerful were often stocked with an astonishing array of food offerings intended to provide the deceased with a veritable feast in the afterlife. Excavations have revealed the remains of everything from bread and beer to roasted meats and exotic fruits. One of the most striking examples of this practice was discovered in the tomb of King Tutankhamun, who ruled Egypt in the 14th century BCE. When archaeologists first entered the tomb in 1922, they were amazed to find a veritable treasure trove of food offerings, including loaves of bread, jars of wine and beer, and even cuts of meat that had been mummified alongside the young pharaoh. But perhaps the most peculiar food-related finds in Egyptian tombs are the so-called mummy cakes. These small conical cakes were made from a mixture of flour, honey, and spices, and were often shaped to resemble various body parts. Some were moulded in the shape of ears, perhaps as an offering to the god Horus, who lost his ear in a battle with his uncle Set. Others were shaped like phalluses, possibly as a symbol of fertility and regeneration. Even more intriguing is the discovery of watermelon seeds in several Egyptian tombs. Watermelons were not native to Egypt and were likely introduced from further south in Africa. But why would the Egyptians include watermelon seeds among their funerary offerings? Some scholars speculate that they may have believed the seeds would sprout and grow in the afterlife, providing the deceased with a refreshing treat for all eternity. As we ponder these curious culinary customs, it's worth taking a moment to reflect on the ingenuity and resilience of the ancient Egyptians. Despite living in a harsh and unforgiving environment, they managed to create a rich and varied cuisine that sustained them for centuries. They may not have had access to the global ingredients and advanced technology that we take for granted today, but they made the most of what they had and left behind a legacy that continues to fascinate and inspire us to this day. So the next time you sit down to a meal, take a moment to savor the flavors and textures and to appreciate the long and winding road that our food has traveled to reach our plates. From the banks of the Nile to the kitchens of today, the story of food is the story of human civilization itself, a tale of creativity, adaptation, and enduring spirit in the face of adversity. And who knows, maybe someday, thousands of years from now, archaeologists will uncover the remains of our own culinary culture and marvel at the strange and wondrous foods we left behind. One thing is for certain: the ancient Egyptians would surely be amused by our obsession with avocado toast and pumpkin spice lattes. But for now, let us bid farewell to the land of the pharaohs and their curious cuisine. May their legacy continue to nourish and inspire us as we navigate the challenges and delights of our own food landscape. And may we always remember that, no matter how much things change, the simple joy of breaking bread with loved ones remains a timeless and universal pleasure. So go ahead and let yourself drift off to sleep, dreaming of a time when bread was beer and watermelons grew in the afterlife. Who knows what culinary adventures await us in the great beyond? But one thing is for sure: the ancient Egyptians will be there to welcome us with open arms and a hearty meal. Good night, and sweet dreams of honey cakes and mummified meats. As the scorching sun beat down on the banks of the Nile, an ancient Egyptian farmer wiped the sweat from his brow and surveyed his fields with a mix of hope and trepidation. Like his father and grandfather before him, his life revolved around the fickle flow of the great river, the lifeblood that transformed barren desert into bountiful farmland. In a land where the very sands seemed to shimmer with the ghosts of pharaohs past, this humble farmer was locked in an eternal struggle, not to build towering pyramids or grand temples, but simply to coax enough food from the earth to feed his family and fulfill his duties to the state. With a sigh, he hefted his primitive tools, little more than a wooden hoe and a bronze-tipped plough, and began the back-breaking work of tilling the soil. As he toiled, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy for the great kings and queens who ruled from their palaces along the river. For them, food was not a daily worry, but an extravagant luxury, with the finest delicacies laid out in lavish banquets. He had heard tales of the royal kitchens, where scores of servants laboured to prepare exotic dishes like roasted gazelle, spit-roasted ox, and rare fruits and spices from distant lands. But for the common people, the story of food in ancient Egypt was one of scarcity, monotony, and endless labour. The farmer and his family subsisted mainly on a humble diet of bread and beer, the twin pillars that propped up the kingdom. Bread, coarse and gritty, was the first and last thing most Egyptians ate each day, from the lowliest peasants to the scribes and artisans. Baking was a serious business, with large state-run bakeries churning out thousands of loaves to feed the armies of workers who built the monuments and kept the kingdom running. The farmer's wife often spent hours each day grinding grain and kneading dough, her hands chapped and raw from the constant work. The bread was washed down with beer, the other ubiquitous staple of Egyptian life. Despite what many people think today, ancient Egyptian beer was a far cry from the crisp, clear brews we enjoy in modern times. It was a thick, nutritious sludge, full of chaff and debris from the brewing process. Making it was a labor-intensive task that fell mostly to the women, who had to half-bake loaves of barley bread, crumble them into vats of water, and allow the mixture to ferment in the baking sun. The resulting brew was lumpy and tasted vaguely of bread crusts. But it was safer to drink than the often polluted Nile water, and provided much-needed calories and nutrients. Every morning, the farmer collected his daily rations of this liquid bread before heading out to the fields, sipping it throughout the day to stave off hunger and thirst under the merciless sun. Vegetables like onions, leeks, and garlic added some variety to the monotonous fare, along with lentils, peas, and the occasional fish hauled from the Nile's muddy waters. The farmer always looked forward to the end of the inundation season, when the floodwaters receded and revealed fields of wild greens and herbs to gather. His children would race along the banks, plucking handfuls of plump figs and dates from the trees that sprang up in the fertile silt. But such treats were all too rare, and the spectre of hunger was never far away. A poor flood meant meagre crops and empty bellies, while a heavy one could wash away the fields entirely, along with the mud brick houses of the villagers. And even in good years, the harvest was constantly imperiled by pests and blights, from locusts that descended in voracious clouds to the dreaded Nile goose that could strip a field of grain in hours. The farmer had seen such disasters firsthand, watching helplessly as insects ravaged his crops and his family went to bed with aching, empty stomachs. He prayed to the gods of the harvest, leaving small offerings of bread and beer at the local shrine. But he knew that in the end, his fate lay in the fickle hands of nature. Even the pharaohs, for all their power and wealth, were not immune to the whims of the Nile. The farmer remembered the terrible famine that had struck during the reign of King Djoser, when the river failed to rise for 7 straight years. The king had been forced to import grain from as far away as Syria to keep his people from starving, and even then, many had perished. It was said that Djoser's successor, the great pyramid builder, Sneferu, had learned from this calamity and established a system of royal granaries to store surplus grain against future shortages. The farmer had never laid eyes on these fabled storehouses, but he took some small comfort in knowing that somewhere sacks of barley and wheat lay waiting, a bulwark against the lean times. Not that the average Egyptian would ever see a morsel from those royal stores. For most, meat was a once-in-a-lifetime extravagance, a scrap of goat or wild game served up at a wedding or festival. Cattle were far too valuable to waste on food, needed instead to pull the ploughs and turn the creaking wooden water wheels that irrigated the fields. Only the wealthy could afford to indulge in beef, and even then, it was an occasional treat rather than a daily staple. The same went for dairy, with cows needed for farm work. Milk and cheese were rare delicacies, enjoyed only by the elite. The farmer had once glimpsed such a lavish spread when he and his family had travelled to the nearby town for a religious festival. As they jostled through the crowded streets, he had caught a tantalizing whiff of roasting meat and exotic spices. Following his nose, he found himself on the outskirts of a sprawling estate, where servants were laying out a dizzying array of dishes for a nobleman's feast. Whole roasted ducks and geese glistened on platters, surrounded by heaps of pomegranates and dates. Haunches of gazelle and antelope were turning on spits over crackling fires, the fat sizzling and popping as it dripped onto the flames. And in the center of it all, a magnificent roasted ox, its hide crisped to a deep brown, awaited the carving knife. The farmer's mouth watered as he watched the guests tucking into the spread, dabbing their fingers on linen napkins and washing down each rich mouthful with sips of date wine. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine being one of them, savoring the tender meat and luscious fruits, his belly full, and his cares forgotten. But all too soon, a servant shooed him away, and he shuffled back to his family, the taste of the fantasy already fading on his tongue. That night, as they huddled around their meager dinner of bread and beer, he said nothing of what he had seen, not wanting to stir up envy or resentment. Instead, he told his children one of the old stories his own father had once told him, about the great god Osiris, who had taught their ancestors the secrets of agriculture, the art of coaxing life from the soil. Osiris was a kind and just ruler, the farmer explained, who wanted all his people to have full bellies and contented hearts. But Osiris had a jealous brother named Set, who resented his popularity and coveted his throne. One day, Set tricked Osiris into lying down in a beautiful wooden chest, then slammed the lid shut and threw it into the Nile. Osiris drowned, and Set declared himself the new king, plunging Egypt into an age of darkness and misery. Yet all was not lost, for Osiris's faithful wife Isis searched tirelessly for her husband's body, finally finding it washed up in a foreign land. With the help of her sister Nephthys and the wise god Thoth, Isis used her magic to resurrect Osiris, making him the lord of the underworld and the judge of the dead. And so Osiris lived on, the farmer concluded, watching over the harvest from beyond the grave, ensuring that the Nile flooded its banks each year and the crops sprouted from the rich black soil. As long as the people remembered his teachings and honored his memory, Egypt would endure, no matter what hardships befell it. The farmer's children listened raptly, their eyes wide in the flickering light of the hearth. They had heard the story many times before, but it never failed to comfort them, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always hope for renewal and rebirth. As the family settled down to sleep on their woven reed mats, the farmer offered up a silent prayer to Osiris, thanking him for the meager blessings of the day: a few sacks of grain, a jug of clean water, a roof over their heads. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them alive, to keep the spark of life burning for another day in this harsh and unforgiving land. Little did the farmer know that his humble prayers were part of a grand tapestry, a web of faith and tradition that stretched back thousands of years and bound all Egyptians together, from the mightiest pharaoh to the lowliest serf. For in the end, they were all children of the Nile, all dependent on the fickle bounty of the river and the gods who ruled over it. And so the farmer slept, his body weary, but his heart full, dreaming of a day when his children's children might know a life of plenty, a life where food was not a daily struggle, but a joyous celebration of the land's abundance. It was a dream that would sustain him through the long years of toil ahead, a dream as eternal as the Nile itself. As the first rays of dawn crept across the horizon, the farmer awoke to the sound of his wife grinding grain for the day's bread. He stretched his aching muscles and breathed in the cool morning air, savoring the fleeting moment of peace before the day's labors began anew. With a final prayer of thanks, he rose to his feet and stepped out into the fields, ready to coax another harvest from the stubborn soil. The sun climbed higher in the sky, baking the earth and sapping his strength, but he pushed on, driven by the knowledge that his sweat and sacrifice were part of something greater, a sacred pact between the people and the land that had endured for centuries. In the distance, the great pyramids loomed, their smooth limestone faces glinting in the sun. The farmer had heard stories of the armies of workers who had built them, laboring for decades under the watchful eyes of the pharaohs. He wondered what they had eaten during those long years of toil, if they had subsisted on the same meager fare as he and his family. Somehow, he doubted it. The pharaohs, after all, had the power to command the very best of everything, from the choicest cuts of meat to the rarest fruits and spices. He had heard whispers of the elaborate feasts they held in their palaces, where guests dined on delicacies like roasted ox, spit-roasted ducks, and exotic dishes flavored with cinnamon, cumin, and other precious spices from distant lands. But even the pharaohs, with all their wealth and power, were not immune to the whims of fate and the gods. The farmer remembered the story of King Menes, the legendary first pharaoh who had united Upper and Lower Egypt into a single kingdom. Menes had been a great warrior and builder, the story went, but he had met his end in the jaws of a hippopotamus, dragged to his death in the muddy waters of the Nile. It was a reminder that no man, no matter how mighty, could escape the cycle of life and death that ruled over all things. And in the end, the farmer mused, what did it matter if one dined on roasted gazelle or humble bread and beer? All men's bodies returned to the earth from whence they came, their souls journeying to the underworld to face the judgment of Osiris. The farmer paused to wipe the sweat from his brow, his eyes scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. In the distance, he could see a flock of ibises winging their way across the sky, their long curved beaks glinting in the sun. He breathed a sigh of relief. Ibises were a good omen, a sign of the gods' favor and the promise of a bountiful harvest. But even as he offered up a silent prayer of thanks, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had been growing in his heart. The Nile had been behaving strangely of late, its waters rising and falling in unpredictable patterns that defied the wisdom of the elders. Some whispered that the gods were angry, that they were withholding their blessings as punishment for some grave offense. The farmer didn't know what to believe, but he knew that he could not afford to take any chances. With a heavy heart, he made his way to the edge of his fields, where a small shrine stood in honor of the local gods. He had built it himself years ago, a humble offering of mud bricks and reed mats, adorned with a few sprigs of wildflowers and a handful of copper coins. Kneeling before the shrine, he bowed his head and began to pray, his voice low and fervent. He asked the gods for their protection and guidance, for the strength to endure the trials ahead and the wisdom to lead his family through the uncertain times. He promised to make extra offerings, to dedicate a portion of his harvest to the temple, if only they would show him their favor. As he prayed, he felt a sense of peace wash over him, a quiet assurance that he was not alone in his struggles. The gods were listening, he told himself, and they would not abandon their faithful servants in their hour of need. With renewed determination, the farmer rose to his feet and returned to his labors, his mind focused on the tasks at hand. There was still so much to be done, fields to be tilled, seeds to be planted, irrigation channels to be dug. But he would not falter, would not let despair overtake him. He was a son of Egypt, a child of the Nile, and he would endure, as his ancestors had endured for generations untold. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, the farmer finally allowed himself a moment of rest, his body aching from the long day's toil. He made his way back to his humble dwelling, where his wife was waiting with a meager supper of bread and beer. The farmer gratefully accepted the food, savoring each bite as if it were a feast fit for a king. In a way, he mused, it was a feast of love and family, of the simple joys that made life worth living, even in the face of hardship and uncertainty. As he lay down to sleep that night, the farmer's thoughts drifted to the future, to the generations yet unborn who would inherit this land and carry on the ancient ways. He prayed that they would know a life of plenty, a life where food was not a daily struggle but a joyous celebration of the land's bounty. And as he drifted off to sleep, he dreamed of fields of golden wheat stretching to the horizon, of granaries overflowing with the fruits of the earth, of a time when all Egyptians, from the mightiest pharaoh to the lowliest peasant, would know the blessing of a full belly and a contented heart. It was a dream that had sustained his people for centuries, a dream as eternal as the Nile itself. And though the farmer knew he might not live to see it realized, he took comfort in the knowledge that he had played his part, that his labours had helped to keep the dream alive for another generation. In the end, that was all any man could ask for: to leave the world a little better than he had found it, to plant seeds of hope that would take root and flourish long after he was gone. And so the farmer slept, his dreams filled with visions of a brighter tomorrow, a tomorrow that he had helped to build with his own two hands, one day at a time. As we've seen, the ancient Egyptians faced many challenges and hardships when it came to feeding their civilization. From the backbreaking labor of farming to the constant threat of pests and the lack of refrigeration, it was a daily struggle to keep everyone fed. But despite the difficulties, they managed to create a complex and enduring food culture that sustained them for thousands of years. One of the most impressive aspects of ancient Egyptian agriculture was the sheer scale of the operations. The Nile Valley was one of the most fertile regions in the world, and the Egyptians took full advantage of it. They developed sophisticated irrigation systems, with canals and dams to control the flow of water and maximize crop yields. They also used a variety of tools and techniques to plant, tend, and harvest their crops, from simple wooden plows to specialized sickles for cutting wheat. The work of farming fell mainly on the shoulders of the common people, who made up the vast majority of the population. It was a hard life, with long hours of physical labor in the hot sun. But it was also a life deeply intertwined with the rhythms of the Nile and the seasons. The annual flooding of the river was a time of renewal and celebration, as the waters receded and left behind a fresh layer of rich silt for planting. For a typical farming family, the year revolved around the agricultural cycle. They would spend the spring months preparing the fields, ploughing the soil and sowing the seeds. Then came the long summer of tending the growing crops, weeding and watering and watching anxiously for signs of pests or disease. Finally, in the fall, it was time for the harvest, a backbreaking but joyous time of gathering in the bounty of the land. One of the most important figures in this process was the farmer himself, a hard-working, skilled individual who held a vital role in society. Let's imagine a typical day in the life of an ancient Egyptian farmer, whom we'll call 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐻. 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐻 rises before dawn, as he does every morning. He offers a quick prayer to the gods for a good harvest, then sets out to the fields with his sons and hired workers. They spend the morning hours ploughing the rich earth with their ox-drawn ploughs, the sweat dripping from their brows in the already hot sun. As the day wears on, they take a break for a simple meal of bread and onions, washed down with beer. Then it's back to work, planting seeds and covering them carefully with soil. 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻 keeps a watchful eye on the irrigation canals, making sure the water is flowing properly to each patch of land. As the sun starts to sink towards the horizon, 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐻 and his family head back to their small mud brick house on the edge of the fields. His wife has been busy grinding grain and baking bread for the evening meal. They sit down together to share the simple but satisfying food, along with some salt-cured fish from the Nile. After dinner, 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐻 takes a moment to survey his land in the fading light. The crops are coming along well this year, with the barley and wheat standing tall and green. He says another prayer of thanks to the gods and turns in for the night, ready to start again in the morning. This was the daily reality for the vast majority of ancient Egyptians, a life of hard work and simple pleasures, deeply connected to the land and the river. But as we've seen, even the most diligent farmer was at the mercy of forces beyond their control. One of the biggest threats to the harvest was the presence of pests, from locusts to rats to hippopotamuses. These creatures could devour entire fields of crops in a matter of days, leaving the farmers with nothing to show for their months of labor. Imagine the despair of a farming family watching helplessly as a swarm of locusts descends on their land, eating everything in their path. The air is filled with the buzzing of countless wings as the insects swoop and dive, stripping the stalks bare. The family rushes to light fires and create smoke, hoping to drive the locusts away, but it's too late. The damage has been done. In the aftermath, they survey the ruined fields with heavy hearts. The barley and wheat that should have fed them for months is gone, leaving only stubble behind. They will have to rely on their meager stores from the previous harvest and hope that the next year brings better luck. It was a constant battle against the elements and the ravages of nature, one that required resilience, perseverance, and no small amount of faith. But the ancient Egyptians rose to the challenge time and time again, finding ways to adapt and overcome. One of the keys to their success was their ability to store and preserve food for lean times. They developed sophisticated methods for drying and salting meat and fish, and for storing grain in underground silos. But even these measures were not foolproof. The silos, in particular, were prone to moisture and decay. The grain would often rot or become infested with insects, turning the carefully hoarded stores into a stinking mess. Imagine the frustration of a farmer opening a silo after months of storage, only to find that the grain has turned to mush and is crawling with weevils. Despite these setbacks, the ancient Egyptians persevered. They continued to farm and to store, to pray to the gods and to hope for the best. And slowly but surely, they built one of the most enduring and influential civilizations the world has ever seen. Of course, not all ancient Egyptians were farmers. There was also a thriving class of artisans and craftspeople, including the bakers who turned the harvested grain into the staple food of the civilization, bread. Bread making was a major industry in ancient Egypt, with both large state-run bakeries and small independent operations. The process was labor-intensive and time-consuming, with multiple steps from grinding the grain to kneading the dough to baking the loaves in large open ovens. Let's take a closer look at the life of an ancient Egyptian baker, whom we'll call Nefertari. Nefertari is a young woman who has been apprenticed to a master baker in the city of Thebes. She spends her days toiling in the hot, smoky bakehouse, surrounded by the smell of yeast and the clatter of bread paddles. The work is hard and the hours are long. Nefertari rises before dawn to start the day's baking, mixing the dough and shaping it into loaves. She works quickly and efficiently, her hands moving in a blur as she rolls and slaps the dough onto the paddle. As the sun rises higher in the sky, the heat in the bakehouse becomes almost unbearable. Nefertari is dripping with sweat as she slides the loaves into the massive clay oven, using a long wooden peel to maneuver them into place. The fire roars and crackles, and the air is thick with smoke. Despite the challenges, Nefertari takes pride in her work. She knows that the bread she bakes will feed the people of Thebes, from the lowliest laborers to the highest officials. She takes care to make each loaf as perfect as possible, with a crispy crust and a soft, fluffy interior. But even the most skilled baker faces dangers in the bakehouse. The risk of fire is ever present, with the open flames and the piles of fuel. One spark can quickly turn into a blaze, engulfing the entire workshop in a matter of minutes. Nefertari has seen it happen before. The frantic rush to douse the flames, the acrid smell of burnt bread and charred wood. She knows that she must be vigilant at all times, keeping a watchful eye on the fire and the ovens. Despite the risks, Nefertari loves her work. She takes pride in being part of a long tradition of Egyptian baking, one that stretches back generations. And she knows that the bread she makes is more than just food. It is a symbol of the strength and resilience of her people. Indeed, bread was the foundation of the ancient Egyptian diet, consumed by everyone from the pharaoh to the lowliest laborer. It was so important that it was often used as a form of currency, with workers being paid in loaves rather than coins. But man cannot live by bread alone, as the saying goes. The ancient Egyptians also had a deep love for another staple of their diet, beer. Beer was the drink of choice for most Egyptians, consumed in vast quantities by people of all social classes. It was brewed from a mixture of half-baked barley bread and water, fermented until it reached the desired level of alcohol content. The resulting beverage was thick and cloudy, with a consistency more like thin porridge than the clear, carbonated beers we know today. It was full of chaff and debris from the grain, and had a distinctively sour, slightly funky flavour that took some getting used to. But despite its unusual appearance and taste, beer was a vital part of ancient Egyptian culture. It was consumed at every meal, from breakfast to dinner, and was even used in religious ceremonies and offerings to the gods. Let's imagine a typical evening in the life of an ancient Egyptian couple, whom we'll call Thutmose and Sesetnefret. After a long day of work in the fields or the workshops, they sit down to a simple meal of bread, vegetables, and salt-cured fish. But the highlight of the meal is the beer. Thutmose carefully pours the thick, frothy liquid into 2 clay cups and hands one to his wife with a smile. They raise their cups in a toast to the gods and take a long, satisfying sip. The beer is cool and refreshing after a day in the hot sun, and the alcohol helps to soothe their tired muscles. They savour the complex flavours, the sweet, nutty taste of the barley, the tangy sourness of the fermentation, and the slightly bitter finish. As they drink, they talk about their day and their plans for the future. The beer helps to loosen their tongues and bring them closer together, a social lubricant that has been part of Egyptian culture for generations. And they're not alone. All around them, in the small mud brick houses and the grand palaces, Egyptians are enjoying their own evening beers. It's a ritual that binds the community together, a shared experience that transcends social class and status. Of course, not all ancient Egyptian beer was created equal. Just like with bread, there were variations and specialties that differed from region to region and household to household. In some areas, brewers would add dates or honey to the mixture to create a sweeter, more flavorful beer. In others, they would use different types of grain or adjust the fermentation time to create unique local styles. Some wealthy Egyptians even had their own private breweries, where they could create custom blends to suit their own tastes. The pharaohs and their court were known to indulge in particularly fine brews, flavored with exotic spices and served in gold and silver cups. But for the most part, beer was a democratic beverage, enjoyed by all members of society. It was a source of nutrition as well as pleasure, providing valuable calories and nutrients in a time when food could be scarce. Of course, not everyone in ancient Egypt had access to such a wide variety of foods and drinks. For the vast majority of the population, meat and dairy products were a rare luxury, reserved for special occasions and the tables of the wealthy. Cattle were highly valued for their role in agriculture, used for ploughing and hauling rather than for their meat. Beef was almost unheard of for most Egyptians, and even the most prosperous households would only slaughter a cow for the most important religious festivals. Other types of meat were more common, but still not an everyday food. Goat, sheep, and pigs were raised for their meat, and wild game like gazelle and antelope were hunted in the desert regions. Fish and poultry were more accessible to the average Egyptian, with the Nile providing a steady supply of tilapia, catfish, and other species. Ducks, geese, pigeons, and quail were also popular and could be raised in small flocks by households with a bit of extra space. But even these meats were often reserved for special occasions or for the offerings left in the tombs of the deceased. For most Egyptians, a meal of bread, vegetables, and beer was the norm, with meat as an occasional treat. Dairy products were also a rarity, with milk and cheese reserved for the elite. Cows were too valuable for their labor to be used for milk production, and dairy cattle were uncommon in the hot, dry climate of Egypt. Let's imagine a scene at a royal banquet, where the tables are piled high with the finest meats and cheeses. The pharaoh and his court recline on cushions, sipping wine from golden goblets and nibbling on delicacies like roast duck and honey-glazed antelope. In the background, a group of musicians plays a soft melody on harps and flutes, adding to the atmosphere of luxury and indulgence. Servants circulate with platters of fruit and sweetmeats, offering them to the guests with deep bows. But outside the palace walls, the common people can only dream of such a feast. They pass by the gates with empty bellies and envious glances, knowing that they will likely never taste such fine foods in their lifetimes. It's a stark reminder of the inequality that existed in ancient Egyptian society, where the wealth and resources were concentrated in the hands of a privileged few. While the pharaohs and their court enjoyed the best of everything, the vast majority of the population struggled to get by on a meager diet of bread and beer. But despite the hardships, the ancient Egyptians managed to create a rich and varied culinary tradition that endured for thousands of years. Through their ingenuity and resourcefulness, they found ways to make the most of the ingredients available to them, and to create a cuisine that was both nourishing and flavorful. One of the greatest challenges they faced was the lack of basic sanitation and hygiene, which led to frequent outbreaks of foodborne illness and disease. Without refrigeration or modern preservation techniques, food spoiled quickly in the hot Egyptian climate, especially meat and dairy products. This meant that many Egyptians suffered from malnutrition and parasitic infections, despite the abundance of food available in the fertile Nile Valley. Archaeological evidence shows that many people had stunted growth and weakened immune systems, likely due to a combination of poor diet and unsanitary living conditions. But the ancient Egyptians were nothing if not resilient, and they found ways to cope with these challenges as best they could. They developed techniques for salting and drying meat and fish to extend their shelf life, and they used herbs and spices to mask the taste of spoiled food. They also had a complex system of food preparation and serving, with strict rules and rituals designed to minimize the risk of contamination. The pharaohs and other high-ranking officials had their own personal chefs and food tasters, whose job it was to ensure that the food was safe and free from poison. Let's imagine a day in the life of one of these royal food tasters, whom we'll call Amenhotep. It's a position of great responsibility and danger, as Amenhotep must sample every dish before it's served to the pharaoh, checking for any signs of spoilage or tampering. He arrives at the palace kitchens early in the morning, just as the cooks are starting to prepare the day's meals. He watches carefully as they chop vegetables, grind spices, and roast meats over open fires, making mental notes of every ingredient and technique. When the dishes are ready, Amenhotep takes a small portion of each one and tastes it carefully, rolling the flavors around in his mouth and checking for any off notes or unusual sensations. He knows that even the slightest hint of bitterness or sourness could be a sign of poison, and he must be vigilant at all times. If he detects anything amiss, he immediately alerts the cooks and the palace guards, who rush to investigate the source of the contamination. It's a high-stakes job, with the lives of the pharaoh and his court hanging in the balance, but Amenhotep takes pride in his work, knowing that he is serving a vital role in protecting the most important people in the kingdom. And he knows that his skills and expertise are highly valued, with a generous salary and a position of respect within the palace hierarchy. Of course, not all ancient Egyptians were so fortunate. For the vast majority of the population, food was a daily struggle, with malnutrition and hunger a constant threat. But despite the challenges, they managed to create a rich and enduring culinary tradition that continues to influence and inspire us to this day. From the humble loaf of bread to the elaborate feasts of the pharaohs, food was an integral part of ancient Egyptian culture, shaping their society and their way of life in countless ways. It was a source of sustenance and pleasure, a symbol of status and power, and a connection to the gods and the natural world around them. And while we may not face the same challenges and hardships that the ancient Egyptians did, we can still learn from their example. Their resilience, ingenuity, and adaptability in the face of adversity are qualities that we can all aspire to in our own lives and in our own struggles. So the next time you sit down to a meal, take a moment to appreciate the abundance and variety of foods available to you. And remember the ancient Egyptians who worked so hard and sacrificed so much to create a cuisine that endures to this day. As we've seen, the ancient Egyptians faced no shortage of challenges when it came to feeding themselves and keeping their larders stocked. But despite the many hardships, they still managed to create a remarkably complex and enduring cuisine that sustained one of the world's greatest civilizations for thousands of years. While the details of recipes and cooking techniques have largely been lost to time, archaeologists have been able to piece together a surprisingly vivid picture of ancient Egyptian food and drink by studying everything from tomb paintings and offering tables to the contents of long-sealed kitchen middens. And what they've found is a culinary tradition that in many ways seems quite familiar to modern diners, yet at the same time is shot through with reminders of just how different and difficult daily life could be in the age of the pharaohs. Take bread, for instance, the absolute bedrock of the ancient Egyptian diet. Today, we might think nothing of biting into a soft, fluffy pita or baguette, but for the average Egyptian, bread was a much rougher, denser affair. Loaves were generally made from coarse barley or emmer wheat flour, often mixed with bits of chaff, sand, and other debris from the grinding process. Without modern leavening agents like yeast or baking powder, most bread was flatbread, tough, chewy, and quick to go stale in the dry desert air. Still, bread was undeniably the staff of life for Egyptians rich and poor alike. A typical laborer's ration included 3 to 5 loaves per day, while even the pharaoh's royal menu almost always featured bread in some form. From the dense, dark cakes served to soldiers on the march, to the towering display breads sculpted into ornate shapes for religious festivals and feasts. In fact, the Egyptians had a dizzying array of names for different bread varieties: BSN bread, THDJ bread, BTY bread, SNS bread, each distinguished by its shape, flavor, or ceremonial function. But man cannot live by bread alone. And fortunately, the Egyptians had devised some clever ways to stretch out their grain supply and add some variety to their meals. One of the most important was beer, which in ancient Egypt was quite a different drink than the crisp, clear brews we enjoy today. For one thing, it was almost always thick and cloudy, thanks to the mash of half-baked barley bread used as the main fermenting agent. For another, it was unfiltered, meaning each sip came with a mouthful of chaff, grain bits, and other debris that had to be strained out with the teeth. But what Egyptian beer lacked in refinement, it more than made up for in sheer prevalence and social significance. Beer was brewed in massive quantities by the royal court, temples, and large estates. But it was also a staple of domestic life, with most households keeping a steady supply on hand for daily drinking. It was enjoyed by everyone from the lowliest peasant to the pharaoh himself, though the quality and strength of the brew, of course, depended on one's social status. A special sweet, high-alcohol beer, known as ha'amt, for instance, was reserved solely for the gods and the most elite human drinkers. For most Egyptians, though, beer was simply a cheap and relatively reliable way to purify water, boost the nutritional content of a meal, and perhaps enjoy a mild buzz to boot. It was such an integral part of the diet, in fact, that standard wages and rations were actually paid out in jugs of beer as well as loaves of bread. It's a system that may well have lubricated the building of the pyramids and other great monuments, though one suspects that trying to do detail work while tipsy on 5% ABV brew couldn't have helped matters much. Aside from bread and beer, most Egyptians subsisted on a simple, largely vegetarian diet that revolved around the Nile's annual flooding and farming cycle. The staple crops were wheat, barley, and flax, supplemented by a variety of garden vegetables like onions, leeks, garlic, lentils, peas, beans, radishes, turnips, and lettuce. Fruit was a much rarer treat, limited mainly to dates, figs, grapes, and the occasional melon. All foods associated with sweetness and abundance. Conspicuously absent from most Egyptians' everyday fare, though, was meat. For much of the population, meat was a luxury to be enjoyed only on special occasions, if at all. Cattle were simply too valuable as draft animals to be regularly slaughtered for food, while sheep, goats, and pigs were also relatively uncommon and expensive. Wild game like gazelle, antelope, and hippopotamus was somewhat more accessible, but still required the means and leisure to go hunting in the desert or marshlands. For the true meat lover then, the best options were fish and poultry, which could be more easily raised or caught in the Nile Valley environment. Fish were a staple of many poorer Egyptians' diets, caught using nets, traps, lines, and harpoons in the river and its canals. The most common species were Nile perch, catfish, mullet, and tilapia, all of which are still eaten in Egypt today, albeit in rather different preparations. Poultry, meanwhile, primarily meant ducks, geese, pigeons, and quail, with waterfowl being especially prized for their rich, fatty meat. But while the common folk made do with small portions of fish and fowl on special occasions, the dining habits of the elite were a different story entirely. A royal or noble feast was a sumptuous affair, with multiple courses of meat, poultry, and fish served on gold or silver platters and eaten with ivory, alabaster, or bronze utensils. Prized delicacies might include whole roasted ox, antelope, wild ass, crane, and other exotic fare, often garnished with flowers and accompanied by fine wines, sweets, and other rare treats. Even in death, food loomed large in the Egyptian imagination, as evidenced by the elaborate banquets and food offerings that accompanied the mummified bodies of the wealthy into the afterlife. The deceased's tomb would be piled high with symbolic offerings of bread, beer, meat, fruits, and vegetables, all painstakingly rendered in paint, plaster, or stone to guarantee an eternal supply. Some tombs even included detailed menus listing out the ideal daily rations for the departed, giving us a rare glimpse into the culinary aspirations of the upper crust. But perhaps the most intriguing food-related Egyptian practice was the use of certain edibles in the mummification process itself. Alongside the more famous embalming components like natron salt, resin, and linen, a number of foodstuffs played key roles in preserving and symbolically sustaining the body for the afterlife. Juniper berries and cinnamon were often packed into the body cavity, both for their antibacterial properties and their association with vitality and warmth. Onions were placed in the eye sockets or on the chest, not only to absorb moisture, but also as symbols of eternity, thanks to their spherical, complete shape. And then there was honey, that most regal and luxurious of Egyptian foods, prized for its sweetness, rarity, and seemingly magical preservative powers. Jars of honey were among the most common and valuable grave goods, believed to provide the deceased with a potent source of nourishment and energy in the hereafter. But it was also sometimes poured directly over the body as an additional embalming agent, most famously in the case of Alexander the Great, whose remains were said to have been immersed in a coffin full of liquid honey. Strange as some of these practices may sound to modern ears, they speak to the deep and abiding reverence the Egyptians held for food, not only as a material necessity, but as a sacred link between this world and the next. In a land where the difference between feast and famine, life and death, so often hinged on the whims of the Nile and the blessings of the gods, food was power, an almost holy substance charged with ritual and existential significance. And so, as we tuck into our bulging grocery bags and well-stocked fridges, it's worth sparing a thought for the ancient Egyptians, who managed to build an enduring civilization in the face of scarcity, hardship, and constant existential threat. Their fascinating and often brilliantly ingenious food culture serves as a reminder that human resilience and creativity know no bounds. Whether in the sun-baked fields of the Nile Valley or the fluorescent-lit aisles of a modern supermarket, the next time you slice into a loaf of pillowy soft bread or crack open an ice-cold beer, then take a moment to savor the complex web of history and culture that stretches back from your plate to the dusty banks of the Nile. The bakers, brewers, and farmers of ancient Egypt may be long gone, but in our enduring appetites and timeless tastes, their legacy lives on. The mystery and intrigue surrounding mummification has long captured our imagination. But amidst the sacred rituals and complex beliefs about the afterlife, did you know that ancient Egyptian embalmers relied heavily on everyday foods to prepare bodies for eternity? Salt, honey, resins, oils, spices, the very same ingredients used to flavor and preserve meals, played a starring role in this most solemn of ceremonies. The key to a successful mummification was thorough desiccation, removing all moisture from the body to prevent decay. And what better way to draw out water than with salt, nature's original preservative? Embalmers would pack the body cavities with sack after sack of natron, a naturally occurring salt mine from dry lake beds. Over a period of weeks, the salt would slowly leach out bodily fluids, leaving behind a dry, leathery husk. But salt alone wasn't enough to fully protect the body from the ravages of time. Next, embalmers turned to another pantry staple, honey. Prized for its sweetness and rarity, honey was generously slathered on the skin as a sealant and antibacterial layer. Its sugary composition helped to further dehydrate tissues, while also imbuing the mummy with a faint floral aroma, a pleasant change from the pungent natron. Resins and oils were also critical components, used to fill the empty body cavities and keep the withered skin supple. Frankincense, myrrh, cedar oil, and juniper oil, the same fragrant substances burned as incense in temples, were carefully measured and mixed to create a potent preservative balm. Imagine the embalming workshop, filled with the heady scent of exotic spices wafting from simmering pots of oil. But perhaps most surprising to our modern palates is the use of spices like cinnamon and black pepper in mummification. Today we reach for these to add a dash of flavor to sweet and savory dishes. But to the ancient Egyptians, their sharp, astringent qualities made them ideal for warding off decay. Ground into a fine powder, they could be packed into the nose, ears, and other orifices to thoroughly dry them out. The exact mummification recipes were closely guarded secrets, passed down from master embalmers to their apprentices. Each workshop had its own signature blend, but the basic ingredients remained the same: salt, honey, resins, oils, and spices, all working together to transform a lifeless corpse into an eternal vessel for the soul. Picture an embalmer carefully measuring out each component, grinding spices with a mortar and pestle, heating oil and resin in a bronze cauldron. With practiced hands, he stuffs linen bags full of natron and fragrant powders, then methodically applies them to the body, all the while murmuring prayers and incantations. For him, this is not just a job, but a sacred duty to ensure the deceased's successful journey to the afterlife. It's a strange thought that the very same foods ancient Egyptians enjoyed in their daily meals also played such a pivotal role in death. That the same honey drizzled over a loaf of bread might end up coating a mummy's skin, or the same salt used to cure fish would be packed into a pharaoh's body cavities. In a culture where the lines between this world and the next were fluid, it seems only fitting that the staples of life would also serve in the rituals of death. So the next time you sprinkle some cinnamon on your oatmeal or spread honey on your toast, take a moment to ponder its ancient Egyptian legacy. That unassuming spice jar in your cupboard shares a history with the grand mausoleums of the Valley of the Kings. The natron and myrrh forever preserving the bodies of the mighty pharaohs. Just one of the many surprising ways the land of the Nile still touches our lives today. The ancient Egyptians are often depicted as a dour, serious lot, and perhaps that's unsurprising given their preoccupation with the solemn business of death. But even amidst the grandeur of the pyramids and the gravity of the afterlife, there are glimpses of whimsy and humour to be found in their approach to food. Take, for instance, the elaborate feasts laid out on offering tables in the tombs of the pharaohs and nobles. Amidst the standard fare of bread, beer, and cuts of meat, we sometimes find more exotic delicacies: a spit-roasted ox, a perfectly bronzed goose, even the occasional whole-roasted swan or antelope. One can almost picture the ghostly pharaoh reclining at his eternal banquet table, gesturing imperiously for another slice of gazelle haunch. But it's not just the quantity and variety of food that's striking, it's also the way it's presented. Many offering tables featured intricately carved and painted images of the dishes, a sort of ancient Egyptian menu, if you will. Detailed depictions of succulent cuts of beef, plump ducks, ripe figs and dates, all laid out in mouth-watering detail, as if to tempt the deceased's incorporeal appetite. Even more curious are the occasional inclusion of foods imbued with symbolic or magical properties. Lotus flowers and buds were a popular motif, often shown being sniffed by the deceased or held in their hands. It was believed that the scent of the lotus had the power to restore the senses in the afterlife, allowing the dead to once again savor the pleasures of food and drink. Another peculiar example are the so-called 𝐒𝐥𝐞𝐞𝐞 cakes, small, conical cakes that were sometimes shaped to resemble ears. These were thought to magically open the ears of the mummy, ensuring that they could hear the prayers and invocations being offered on their behalf. One can imagine a cheeky embalmer carefully positioning a plate of ear-shaped cakes near the head of the mummy, as if to say, hear ye, prayers will now commence. But perhaps the most perplexing Egyptian funerary food custom was the practice of entombing miniature model foods and meals with the deceased. Tiny clay or wooden sculptures of granaries, bakeries, breweries, and cattle herds have been found nestled in the tombs, along with minuscule platters heaped with minuscule offerings. The idea seems to have been that these models would magically manifest into the real thing in the afterlife, providing a ceaseless supply of sustenance for the dead. One can picture a bemused spirit wandering the halls of eternity, forever trailed by a tiny herd of clay cattle and an endless procession of pocket-sized offering bearers. Oddly enough, archaeologists have even found watermelon seeds scattered in many Egyptian tombs. It's still a bit of a mystery what these were meant to symbolize. A refreshing snack for the arid journey to the underworld. Or perhaps the Egyptians envisioned the afterlife as a lush, watermelon-filled oasis, where the dead could forever gorge on the sweet, crisp fruit. We may never know for sure, but it's certainly an endearing image. These quirky customs offer a rare glimpse into the ancient Egyptian sense of humor and imagination when it came to the serious business of death. They remind us that even in a culture so focused on the solemnity of the afterlife, there was still room for playfulness, creativity, and even a bit of irreverence. So the next time you're enjoying a slice of watermelon or biting into a pastry shaped like a body part, take a moment to savor the absurdity and wonder of this ancient civilization's approach to eternal nourishment. The ancient Egyptians, proof that you can take your food seriously while still having a little fun with it, even in the great beyond. As we've journeyed through the history of food in ancient Egypt, it's easy to get caught up in the strangeness and challenges they faced. The backbreaking labor of farming in the desert, the constant threat of pests and spoilage, the jaw-dropping inequality between the bread-stuffed masses and the meat-feasting elites. It's a world that seems so far removed from our own, with our refrigerators and grocery stores and globalized cuisine. But despite the hardships and peculiarities, there's also much in the Egyptian approach to food that feels familiar, even admirable. their reverence for the humble staples of bread and beer, grains that sustained a civilization for millennia, the ingenuity and persistence of the farmers who coaxed lush fields from the dry desert year after year, the deep symbolic and spiritual significance they assigned to even the most basic meals and ingredients. In many ways, the core elements of the ancient Egyptian diet were not so different from what we eat today. Flatbreads baked from wheat and barley flour, not unlike our modern pitas and tortillas. A colourful array of green vegetables, leeks, lettuces, garlic, turnips that would look right at home in a contemporary salad bowl. Fish hauled fresh from the Nile, poultry raised in bustling farmyards. And of course, the timeless joys of a cool, frothy beer on a hot summer day. What's changed is not so much the fundamentals of the food itself, but the context in which we consume it. We are the beneficiaries of centuries of accumulated knowledge about nutrition, sanitation, and preservation. We can enjoy a dizzying variety of global ingredients that would have boggled the mind of even the wealthiest pharaoh. And perhaps most importantly, we live in an age where access to good, nourishing food is seen increasingly as a basic right, not a rare privilege. But in appreciating our modern good fortune, let us not forget the skill and sheer grit of the ancient Egyptians who came before us. The farmers who toiled under the blazing sun to fill the granaries that fed the pyramids. The brewers and bakers who transformed those grains into the staples that fueled a kingdom. The fishermen and fowlers who kept the Nile's bounty flowing to both humble hearths and lavish banquet tables. Their lives were not easy, and their fare was often far from fancy. But through their hard work and resourcefulness, they created a complex cuisine and agricultural tradition that endured for thousands of years. They may not have had our technology or abundance, but they had a profound respect for the power of food to nourish both body and soul. And that's a lesson we could all stand to relearn. So the next time you tear into a warm piece of bread or quaff an ice-cold beer, take a moment to raise a toast to the ancient Egyptians who perfected those pleasures so long ago on the banks of the Nile. Savor the simplicity and the history infused in every bite and sip. And give thanks that for all the wonders of the modern world, there's still nothing quite as satisfying as an honest meal, lovingly prepared from the good earth's bounty. The legacy of ancient Egypt's food lives on, an invisible thread connecting us across the centuries. From the fertile fields of the Nile to the tables of today, their story is forever intertwined with our own. A reminder that no matter how much the world may change, the basic joys and rituals of eating will always endure. And with that comforting thought, dear listener, I bid you good night. May your dreams be filled with visions of golden fields of grain, of cozy mud brick hearths, of tables groaning under the weight of simple, wholesome fare. And may you wake refreshed and nourished, ready to savor all the delicious wonders this life has to offer. Thank you for joining me on this flavorful journey through ancient history, and sweet dreams. The legacy of ancient Egyptian cuisine lives on today in many surprising ways. While their food may have been a far cry from the sumptuous feasts often depicted in popular culture, the agricultural innovations and culinary techniques developed along the Nile laid the groundwork for many foods we still enjoy today. Take, for example, the humble pita bread. This simple flatbread, now a staple of Middle Eastern cuisine, has its roots in the rough barley and wheat loaves consumed by ancient Egyptians of all social classes. While the fluffy, pocketed version we know today is a more recent invention, the basic concept of a quick-cooking, versatile bread that can be stuffed or dipped has been around for thousands of years. In fact, the Egyptians were some of the first to develop the high-gluten wheat varieties that make such airy, elastic breads possible. And what would a pita be without hummus? While the ancient Egyptians didn't have the sesame paste or lemon juice to make the creamy dip we know and love, they were among the first to cultivate chickpeas, lentils, and other legumes that form the backbone of many Mediterranean dishes. These protein-packed pulses helped sustain the population through lean times and meat shortages, and their importance is reflected in the many legume varieties found in Egyptian art and archaeology. Another staple of modern Middle Eastern mezzi platters, baba ganoush, may also have its origins in ancient Egypt. Eggplants, with their glossy purple skins, were prized by Egyptian elites and even found in some pharaohs' tombs. While the ancient dip likely didn't include tahini or olive oil, mashed eggplants seasoned with spices may well have been enjoyed by the upper crust. Even that crisp, cool lager you might reach for to wash down your pita and dips has a long and storied history dating back to the banks of the Nile. While ancient Egyptian beer would have been a far cry from the clear, carbonated brews we enjoy today, the basic process of steeping and fermenting grain was perfected over millennia by Egyptian brewers. Their beer may have been thick, cloudy, and full of debris, but it was also nutritious, safe to drink, and, judging by the quantities consumed across all social strata, quite tasty by their standards. In fact, beer was so important to the ancient Egyptians that it was often used to pay workers' wages, and the goddess Hathor was even dubbed the mistress of drunkenness. Egyptologists have found extensive evidence of large-scale breweries, as well as more intimate beer-making setups in many households, suggesting that the beverage was deeply woven into daily life. And while a frosty glass of Egyptian boozer might not be to modern tastes, it's hard not to admire the ingenuity and dedication that went into perfecting this early craft brew. Of course, not every ancient Egyptian delicacy has stood the test of time. Dishes like roast swan, stuffed pigeon, and antelope stew are unlikely to show up on a modern mezza menu. And while honey was prized as a sweetener and preservative, it was usually reserved for the elites and for use in sacred rituals like mummification. The average Egyptian's diet was likely much simpler and more plant-based, centered around bread, pulses, vegetables, and the occasional fish or fowl. But even in their simplicity, these humble foods were the fuel that powered the construction of the pyramids, the expansion of a great empire, and the flowering of a complex society that continues to captivate us to this day. It's a testament to the resilience and resourcefulness of the ancient Egyptians that they were able to create such enduring wonders while contending with the fickle flooding of the Nile, the constant threat of pests and famine, and the backbreaking labor required to coax sustenance from the desert soil. So the next time you sit down to a meal, take a moment to savor not just the flavors on your plate, but the long and fascinating history behind them. From the first wild grasses domesticated by Neolithic farmers to the high-yielding wheat varieties that now feed billions, the story of agriculture is the story of human civilization itself. And in the annals of that story, the ancient Egyptians will always hold a place of honor as some of the world's first foodies, brewing beer and baking bread on the banks of the Nile and leaving an indelible mark on culinary history. As we come to the end of our journey through the surprisingly unappetizing world of ancient Egyptian cuisine, I hope you've enjoyed this little taste of history. While the food may not always have been the stuff of gourmet dreams, the ingenuity, perseverance, and sheer grit of the ancient Egyptians in the face of culinary adversity is truly awe-inspiring. So here's a final toast to the brewers and bakers, the farmers and fishermen, the foragers, and the pharaohs, who all played a part in shaping one of the world's great cuisines. May their legacy live on, not just in the artifacts and ruins they left behind, but in the simple, sustaining pleasures of bread broken and beer sipped among friends. And now, the story ends. Thank you for joining me tonight on the Sleepy History Channel. We've traversed the humble yet enduring world of ancient Egyptian food, from the fertile banks of the Nile to the smoky hearths where bread and beer gave life to a civilization. Until our next journey together, rest well, dream sweetly, and remember, even the simplest meal can carry the warmth of history, for gratitude transforms the ordinary into something sacred. Good night.